looks like we're streaming, at least on mine.
Yeah, it just takes a second to actually load. All right, I think we're all good.
Okay, do we have our stenographer with us? Can she let Sabrina know that she's here if she's here?
Hold on, I'm not
Or he?
broadcasting yet.
Oh,
Now you
okay.
can ask. You should be
Oh,
able to.
okay, thanks. Do we have our stenographer here? If he or she is here, if they could contact Sabrina, that would be helpful.
We have 0 attendees, Lisa, so I don't know if they're,
Is a stenographer.
yeah.
Sorry, Brian.
Who's on the phone?
Yeah, we have somebody on the phone.
Ending in 502.
Yeah.
Sabrina, can you figure out if that's your stenographer?
I really have no way of knowing who it is unless they speak.
Hi, I'm here. Hi, this is
You are the
Rosemary. I'm
stenographer?
here.
Oh,
Yes,
great.
I am.
We're ready to go then. Thank you so much. All right, well then let's bring this meeting. We'll convene the meeting. This is the Common Council Ordinance Committee, a regular meeting. It's May 19th. We're starting the meeting at 7:03. And I'll take the roll call now, if that's okay. Just say here, if you're here. David Hovelman,
Here.
Dominique Johnson,
Here.
Tom Keegan. Tom's here. I see him. Manny Langella is not here yet. He'll be joining us, so we'll let you know when he joins us. Tom Livingston
Here.
is here. Kadeem Roberts is here, and I'm the chairman, Lisa Shanahan. I'm here. So as I understand it, there's no public comments. There's nobody online, and no public comments have been given to us by email. That's right, Brian?
That is correct. I received no emails prior to this meeting starting.
We have Diane Lauricella in the attendees list, and she has her hand raised, so I'll allow
Okay.
her to.
Great.
Go ahead, Diane. You should be able to unmute.
Thank you. During the public participation section, I just wanted to reiterate a couple of things that are on the agenda for tonight. As far as the changes to the ethics ordinance, I know that many have worked very hard to make those changes. I want to reiterate that if at all possible, if you could add a caveat relating to, for future councils as well as this one, that there be a vibrant public education program included, because still there are many people that don't either understand what the Ethics Commission does or have utilized it or know how to utilize it in the proper methods that you intend. Second reason I wanted just to mention is as far as your discussion with the Facilities Construction Committee, I do not know if you'd had a chance to speak with Alex Knopp. He was the mayor that initiated this as a way, over time, the council members had spent hours and hours and hours going over the details of the important details of all of the different construction projects, of course, and I know you mentioned that. I just wanted to suggest that before you do away with this committee, analyze why you couldn't get a quorum or why this did not serve the function all these many years later. A lot of groups sometimes need refreshment. Maybe having that meeting on a different day, I could certainly see why your brains would be mush if you met an hour or two before the council meeting and then you had to meet again. I am concerned that talented members of the public who had been utilized in the Facilities Construction Committee would be left out. So unless and until the council Land Use and Building Management Committee had another way to do this is for you to have a subcommittee or a blue ribbon panel under Tom, under your Land Use and Building Management Committee. Then you have a chance of including experts and people that have specialty in construction from the public who would like to help the city through. So I'm not going to be able to listen to your discussion. I thank you for letting me speak, and I will watch the recording and continue my suggestions in the near future. Stay well and stay safe, everybody.
Thank you, Diane. I just saw that Manny Langella has joined our meeting, so if that his name could be added to the attendees of the committee meeting, that would be great. Our next piece of business will be the acceptance of the minutes from our April 14th, 2020 meeting. We had a special meeting on that date. Does anyone have any, well, first of all, I'd like to have a motion to accept the minutes, and then thank you. Tom has given us the motion to accept the minutes. Does anybody have any revisions that they'd like to point out? All right, so let's vote to see if we can accept the minutes as circulated. So I'll start with David.
Aye.
Yes. Aye. Dominique.
Yes.
Great. Tom Keegan. Accept the minutes. Thank you. Manny.
Aye.
Great. Tom Livingston.
Yes.
Kadeem Roberts.
Aye.
And me. So the acceptance of the minutes is unanimous. We were going to next discuss the Code of Ethics section, but because the Norwalk Facility Construction Commission is much shorter, with no objection, I would like to move that from new business to discuss that now, because we can go pretty quickly with that. And Tom, can you cover that, Tom Livingston, what you're wanting to do with?
Sure. Yeah,
Can you hear
thank
me?
you. Actually, I'm gonna turn it over to
There we
Alan.
go.
This is the,
Great, thank you.
yeah,
I
can you hear
started
me?
to flee, sorry.
okay, yeah. I'm gonna turn it over to Alan
Yes.
in a second. But this is the item that I referenced last month. This is the elimination of the NFCC. The responsibilities will be taken over by the Land Use Committee. I'll let Alan speak to it. I have a couple, if we want to move forward, I have a couple little nits on the thing that I'd like to talk about afterwards, but not substantive. But Alan, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, thank you. I
Alan?
think first I'll start with a little bit of history about NFCC, how the city used to manage projects. I mean, lack of a better word, I don't think we used to manage projects. That's one of the problems. Back in the 1980s, 90s, that's when I started. Each department do their own things, in terms of building operation and construction. So, and by about 1997, the city decided to have a building office of building management, excuse me, to consolidate some of the building management functions, as well as start looking at capital response for capital projects. So this way, when we go up for architects and contractors, and the process and procedures that city has is consistent across the board. Inside each department try to learn how to do things each time they encounter construction projects. So I was like a better volunteer for that work, and I've been doing that ever since. But one of the problems that by me taking on the construction project and building management as staff to land use and building management committee, all those functions becomes a responsibility of land use and building management. So back then, that we didn't have process, so we were trying to develop how to do things. It ended up that we end up interviewing architects at the Land Use and Building Management Committee. So you got a whole bunch of architects come to a committee at 7 o'clock at night, and interview go to like 11 o'clock at night. So a whole bunch of other things that happens, and to a point that I think Bruce Kimmel used to say that it's like a double-headed monster kind of thing. So it is very time consuming on the council member as well as staff too, because it's just so much coordination, and we are all learning at the time. So around 2003, Mayor Knopp has going through the process to decide to create a Norwalk Facility Construction Commission. It's actually a commission, it's not a committee. And adopted the Ordinance Chapter 30, I think it's Chapter 30, 15 to 17, I believe. What it does is it created a commission that's similar to a subcommittee of Common Council. So the commission is made of 11 members with the mayor as a chairperson, 4 members of public who's knowledgeable of building construction. It could be engineer, it could be architect, could be a contractor. And there's a member of a board of ed, member of a board of estimates, and a member of PTO, and I think that's about it. And the superintendent, which is an odd one because generally speaking, with due respect, he's not really, he's kind of staff, but yeah, he's on the commission. So it's always been low. So the superintendent of school never attends an FCC meeting. So in reality, it's only 10 members that shows up. Through the years, we implemented a number of projects, and also the commission actually, there's a procedure set up that we create subcommittee, building committee for each project. And there's very specific guidelines in terms of, there's a, for school projects, there's a principal involved, the PTA members and faculty members and parents involvement and stuff. And most of the time we do those committee, but there are times that we don't because certain nature, like a boiler project, there's no real need for a school building committee. Or sometimes even a renovation, a co-update project could be $3 million, but it's co-update. So there's no programming, no space requirement to talk about. So it's not very attractive thing for people to get involved in, so it's a co-update. People doesn't really get involved in it. And back in the 2000s, we spent about $70 to $90 million worth of capital money in terms of construction. Actually, more than that, include plus the Brian McMahon High School, that's $70 million. So it's about $140, $150 million in construction. So the NFCs are very active in terms of assisting in the management of these projects. At the same time, we hired a program manager. At that point, it's Gubane Construction, buildings, building company. And we hired them and they provided 2 to 3 staff person to support us in terms of coordinating, managing all these projects. And I think that relationship lasted 7 years. As we finish those projects, the need disappears and we move on. So after the FCC is created, there was a lot of, by hiring an outside consultant, we were able to manage a lot of the activity professionally instead of staff. I guess I'm saying I'm not professional, but but at the same time, it's no. So we're able to do a lot of stuff by outside professional service group, and what ended up to go in the Common Council, the NFCC, was just really like reviewing the project, updating monthly meeting, and also approving change order. And one of the things the NFCC does is that when I do change order, I was given the authority to sign off on change order no more than $25,000. So this way I can actually do sign off things. And then at the same time, I bring these items back to the NFCC for subsequent approval, which the commission always felt a little strange because I approved it, the work's been done, and now I'm bringing it back, So that's one responsibility the NFCC had. But yeah, it's always been like it's afterthought, not afterthought, but there's a post approval kind of thing. One reason that the FCC structure did not work too well. There's one council member for each for majority party and one council member from the minority party that's a member of NFCC. The problem is that if one of them doesn't show up to NFCC meeting, the item would go on the Common Council, but without anybody presenting the item in caucus. So the council will not know what the items are, the history, and then these are substantial investment on the city's part. And then meanwhile, there's no representation at the caucus meeting. The council doesn't know what's going on, and then the item appears. So eventually, everything went to land use anyway. So we scheduled land use and NFC the same night because I'm staff to both. So I prepared the agenda. The agenda is almost exactly the same for all these construction items. There's other items that I do that are non-major construction projects like leases and stuff like that. But you get that when we come down to capital improvement projects with very specific actions, it's the same action appear 2 places. And like Tom and both Tom actually, both Tom are members of the NFCC. So they come to the 6 o'clock, 6:30 meeting, and then land use will start 7:30 and with the same item on the agendas. So there's I would say 90% of, 90% of the stuff is duplicated, or 90% more of the stuff is duplicated. So at some point, members of MCC get a little disinterested because it's a lot of stuff is all organized and prepared for them. And to the point that they don't have really authority. The only authority they have is what the Common Council gives them in terms of approving the change order based on the allowance that's set up by the council. For this discussion, say a construction project, $5 million, this $300,000 worth of contingency. So they have the ability to approve change order within the allowance without going to Common Council. But the same time is that most of the times I review, approved, and the work's been done by the time they see it. So it's just, I guess the members feels a little bit, that the need diminishes as time goes on. So when you try to have meetings, a lot of times, a lot lack of interest and focus on some of these issues because everything's probably packaged for them already at that point.
Alan, can I ask one question? You said that 90% of the work is otherwise taken up by the land use. What would be the 10% that's not covered by the NFCC that you feel that would stay with the committee, or would you put it elsewhere?
I think there's three things. Let me go back to just bear with me for a second here. Let me just open something here. Basically, there's three things that the NFCC does that the land use does not do in the past. One is that change orders. Again, NFCC will approve change orders, but land use doesn't, because the council gave the NFCC the authority to sign change orders, approve change orders already. The second thing is that the state recognized a school building committee from the city of Norwalk, and NFCC is by ordinance designated as the school building committee. So there's during certain phase of the projects, right before we go out to bid and we submit the package to the state for approval, the state requires the local school building committee to approve certain actions. So typically there's maybe 2 actions that the NFCC will approve, which does not go to the council. So it's pretty straightforward. It's just 2 actions say, we are hereby submitting, we have reviewed these documents and these are the documents that we're submitting for final approval before we go out to bid. So it's nothing unusual. It's not like a workload. It's just an action that that NFCC approved that does not go to the Common Council. The other thing is currently the NFCC has a requirement to set up school building committee. As I said before, there are times we do, there's times we don't. It's a little subjective on my part because certain project it just doesn't really dictate a whole lengthy committee get together and so. At the same time, it's so NFCC set up these committees, but land use does not have to get involved. But at the same time, we always put land use member on committees because some of these items, when a school building committee review and approve something, it always goes to Common Council. It helps me when I send something to Common Council. There's a council members involved in the process instead of me bringing something, especially interviewing architects and contractors, because a lot of times we do not a lot of times, sometimes we don't approve the low bid consultant or contractor, but the interview process, the evaluation process is essential in recommending a non-low bidder. And so having a council member sitting with us during the interview process, understanding what the criteria is set up and qualification of the proposer, it's important. It helps me in terms of presenting to a land use committee and Common Council as on those occasions when we don't hire the cheapest, the lowest proposal guy person.
Can I just jump in here for a couple of minutes? I've now been on this NFCC for 5 years. And as Alan said, virtually everything is duplicated. And I think to me, it's just a layer of bureaucracy that isn't really helpful to anything and creates a burden on Alan particularly, and those of us who serve on both committees. I also, it's just important to note also that it's not a glamorous position. So, and I say that because there have been times where, and most recently with Doug Hempstead, delegated his role on the commission to another person, which is fine. No objection. He's got a lot of stuff to do. But then you sort of lose the council representation from the minority party, in this case, on that commission. Whereas if we get it back to land use, Tom you or whoever replaces you or more people get a chance to participate. And I think that's really important. And on the review process that Alan just mentioned, we have, as I think he suggested, had myself or another member of the council from land use on the most recent projects. You've looked at the bigger projects, architect selection and so forth. So we've been doing that now, so that won't be a new test. And I finally just want to respond to something Diane asked, which is about having the ability to have experts. Well, we still have that ability under this, under the revised ordinance. We can name a panel if we want to. It's optional, but we do have that capability. So I don't think we lose anything there. Anyway.
So is the only function that we would have trouble with would be if we were working with the state on school, on that one school matter, or is that covered in this, your change?
It's covered in the change. What this,
Okay, great.
the land use will take over that required role. Right now the NFCC is the designated school building committee. Under the ordinance as proposed to be amended, the land use steps into those shoes.
Great. Good. Thank you. That's very clear presentation. Does anybody have any questions of Tom or Alan? Dominique? And then David.
Thank you. I just I appreciate all the information in addition to what we received in our packets and in talking with folks. Just a quick confirmation that the issue of change orders, should there be changes to the design or construction itself, is something that is not going to be a burden to whoever would take that over. I assume at City Hall. I assume there are plans, in place for that 10% piece that Lisa mentioned.
It's the land use that would take him over.
Okay.
But Alan,
For all small and large construction projects, even DPW projects, as well as building construction, road construction, typically we ask for a 10% contingency. And most of the time, I would say 90% of the time, we don't use up all the contingency, but we don't actually bring it back to the council and let you know how much we spent. There's no secret, it's all identified. But at the same time is that within the allowance, we don't say anything. So the only time the council will see, we hear about issue is when we go over, and that's why we have to bring it back to the council for action. But I think when the NFCC at one of the meetings back like 15 years ago, and decided to give staff, not me personally, but the staff the authority to sign change order of $25,000. It is essential because we need to be able to make those decisions on site and keep the project moving. But at the same time, $25,000 is a lot of money. It's not a lot of money because in construction now, I'm seeing change order comes in $35,000, $50,000 regularly. Having the NFCC give me the authority to sign change order $25,000 and bring back things that more than $25,000, it actually helps me a little bit. The reason being is that, if the city have a change order allowance for, let's say, $500,000, if I'm spending money on change order, I don't want to come back one day and all of a sudden they say, oh, I need more money because I spent $500,000 and nobody knows what I spent it on. So it actually helps me and protects me. But to resolve this issue, my proposal is administratively, is this what we're going to do? Because we provide update to Land Use and Building Management Committee every month on the status of our major construction projects. So what I propose to do as part of the update, we will give a little more information, data on the contingency amount, how much we spent, so that there's a tracking mechanism within our presentation every month to land use that we have $500,000 worth of change order allowance and we spend $200,000 so far. So there's a regular kind of update, not specifically exactly what I proved, when the staff approved this month, that month, but at least that we have $500,000 projects halfway through and we spend $100,000, $400,000. So relatively, how much is how we're doing in terms of contingency.
So your view is actually that the Common Council will be more updated because you'll be reporting directly to a committee at the Common Council, even these change order.
Right. But not line item, but overall usage and the contingency.
Great. And David, you had a question?
This brings up a question though, from a change order standpoint, you would then in land use, we would discuss a specific change order that was above the 25,000 at that point.
What I propose is I don't bring it up, but I would bring the overall usage of contingency allowance. So because it's just, that's a piece that would take a long time, because sometimes we get into long discussion about the $25,000. Well, can you do it this way? But it's done already, you know? So there are many times there are long discussion about items that, like, at the end of the day, you know, the NFCC would say to me, well, it's done already, but it's okay, you know, let's keep it moving. So my proposal is that in order to help me to advise the council properly, that our update will include the expenditure on contingency, so that the council always know that how much of it we spent so far in relative to the entire contingency and the status of the project. So
No, Tom, that's not in front of us today, right? Today, we're just talking about the NFCC.
Right, NFCC, but there's just procedures.
And Alan, and also, isn't that true for any other project you do for the city? Not that it's in the update, but
Yes.
Yeah, so this is nothing new.
No. Should we turn our attention? Oh, sorry, David.
So do we want to get into some of the specifics right now of questions throughout of the language here? Or are we just still talking about broad strokes at the moment? So
I was just going to move in that direction. I thought if Alan was done explaining the reasons and Tom for the reason to get rid of the NFCC, I thought we could maybe turn our attention now to the language of the ordinance itself.
Okay, that's fine. We can do that. I have a question that's broad stroke, but it's about something later. If we want to start at the top, that's fine, and go through the ordinance.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you want to do this, Lisa. If I can share the screen, I can put up the, or
Yeah,
Brian
that'd be
can.
great.
Or one of the
Can
Brians.
you share? Whoever's Brian, who's ever the real Brian. Brian, can you share the screen to show?
Or I can,
language.
if somebody tells me how to do it, I mean, gives me that power, I can share it, but.
I have no idea how to share anything like that.
That's okay. Sabrina can do that for you. So Sabrina can allow you to share your screen, Tom.
Okay.
Everybody should be allowed to share their screen. So you should see at the bottom there's a green button that says share screen.
Okay, so here we go. All right, so let me so what you've got in front of you is the ordinance proposed amendment. All the changes have been accepted from what was sent around was the marked version. So this shows all the changes, plus the things you see in red here are just some nits and conforming changes, which I can go through. So for example, in the heading, it's not all capital building projects, of course, it's only city capital projects. I added or any successor thereto to the Land and Building Management Committee, simply to give the council the ability to change the committee if they want to. And otherwise we'd have to amend the ordinance, of course. And then we shall have responsibility for city capital building projects. I did it this way because this is pretty much the way it's done throughout this.
Tom, sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, that's really the gist of the change.
No, it's just, can you go back a little bit?
Yeah.
Previously, the project that the NFC's got involved in, it's over $250,000. So I recommend a change to $400,000, because a lot of project comes in, like boiler replacement project could be $300,000, but at the same time is that we're a school project. So, but at the same time, I just feel that it's more than the dollars, also the scope of work. I think when a project that has multi-discipline in terms of construction, there's electrician, plumbers, and everything else that gets involved. I think it's good to have an outside body that manages. But when you're doing a single item like a boiler replacement or replacing an oil tank and stuff, there's really no need for a third party, for the city to get involved in terms of construction, because it's easier for the school to coordinate their activities and functions to meet those scheduling and facility needs, instead of a third party comes in like this, like me come in and try to figure out when we can do it, how we can do it, access to the building and stuff. So I recommend to increase to $400,000, because a lot of 300, 250, or more than 250 and $400,000 items can be taken care of by the Board of Education, or sometimes fire department do some improvement that could be $200,000 to $300,000, but it really doesn't need an outside body to kind of manage over them, kind of thing.
And the 250,000 was put in at the time this was adopted. So it is all. I understand the only other change I made to this.
Can I go back on this? I have a question on this, Tom. This is David, Hugh of Woolman, sorry. On that question then, are there not multidiscipline projects that are at that 250,000 level, or is most of the time it's a single discipline project?
I would say most of the $250,000, between $250,000 to $400,000. I would say most of the time it's. I mean, I say single. I guess I mean like like a boiler project, but there's still you still need electricians and sometimes they may not have a demo contractor, but I know there's a control company that's involved. So it's more than when I say single trade kind of thing, it's a little more than that. But at the same time, it's very focused and defined scope of work. That's a boiler project that has maybe 2 other subcontractors and stuff. But it's not like you go get a demo contractor, you gotta get a abatement contractor, and then you got plumbers, electricians, and drywall guys, painters, and everything else. So it's more multidiscipline when you get to more $400,000.
Actually, David, if I could maybe jump in there too, because as you know, we do get at the land use, all of the capital projects come through the committee anyway. Right, Alan, pretty much?
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, I think this really is the major project where we take over. Building management only do so much when we take care of the larger projects, but there's many little projects that's under $400,000. But the ones that are under building management, we still go for land use. But then, DPW, if they do a pump station, if they have we never get involved in the pump station anyway. But fire department or the library, they may have projects for $50,000, $60,000, or they would do them themselves.
Right. I guess the question is that, do we get into a gray area where by not having oversight at that level that we end up with things that slip? I mean, if you're saying to me that no, because of the time that the original ordinance was written and the change in time and the change of cost of construction right now and cost of materials, 400,000 is a much more reasonable number. Then that makes sense. Thank you.
Great. So I think that the next point of order would be to make a motion to take this to public hearing. The changes as Tom has included in his, unless anybody has any comments on language itself.
Yeah, I had a couple other questions that if I could. This is David Huvelman again, Lisa. If in 301524, sorry, I'm looking at this. 3015.24, building advisory committees. The point of building advisory committee for any capital building project and shall designate or may designate. There was a shall or may somewhere in here, and I had a question. Why?
Well, I'll answer that. So we have the ability in land use to establish advisory committee at our discretion. But if the gist of this is if we do, then we have to designate the membership and chair. Because if we do it, we have to do that. So I don't know if it makes sense to say may designate the membership because that's not designated committee. That's why it shall.
I think that's correct too.
Okay, so
if you do it, you have
I guess
to.
I was looking at a, so it's shall. Okay, there was a change in there that looked like it. One of the things I looked at said change to may, and I didn't see a consistency. There was shall and may in both, but I see that now. All right, thank you. And the other only question I had was that all school building projects would fall under this to the land use committee, correct? As the designee.
Over 400,000.
Oh, and that again falls into the 400,000 range as well. Okay, thank you.
Great. Any other comments or questions?
Oh, can I just? I'm sorry. Can I say one other thing?
Absolutely.
My statement. These are major construction projects, but all capital expenditure projects. Let's say Board got $200,000 for a cafeteria improvement, they still have to go to Common Council for approval of all the contracts. Because the mayor for capital budget projects, the council authorized the mayor to execute all agreements. So Board of Ed is required to submit those projects, whether it's buying computers or whether it's buying capital expenditure, whether buying computers or whether it's buying, replacing sidewalks or whatever kind of thing. They still have to go to Common Council for approval, and the means to get to Common Council is through land use. So you would see it as the capital council action, but we will not be managing those projects. So this is really managing major construction project that we're talking about. It's over $400,000. You follow the difference? So
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. And believe me, I'm all for seeing this change. I think it streamlines a lot of things and takes away the bureaucracy that Tom was talking about before. No, I'm with it. I just was nitpicking on a couple of items. That's all. Thank you, Alan, very much.
sure.
Okay, back to procedure. Do I have a motion to move this ordinance as we constructed it on to public hearing?
Yeah, I move that the ordinance as I propose to amend it be submitted to public hearing at the next regular meeting of this ordinance committee.
Great, will somebody second that?
Yes,
don't need
I'll
second.
second at least.
We don't need a second.
Yeah, we
We
don't.
don't, okay, great. So let's take a vote then, starting with David, because you're off your mute.
Aye.
Dominique,
Yes.
Tom Keegan,
Yes.
Manny Langella,
Yes.
Tom Livingston,
Yes.
and Kadeem Roberts.
Aye.
Lisa Shanahan votes yes also, so that was passed unanimously. Great, thank you. Alan, thank you for coming tonight.
Oh, sure.
You're on your own. Thank
Thank
you very much.
You too,
All right,
Alan.
take care. Have a
Thanks,
good evening.
Alan.
Thanks,
you,
Alan. Good
Alan.
night.
All right,
Wander
take
around
care.
the house.
Thank you so much. All right, so
Bye.
we're
And
going to
that-
go back up to old business.
And I apologize to the ethics. That took longer than I thought, so.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, ethics, for hanging in there. We're going to now move to the Code of Ethics, Section 3212. And this is, where's my friend Brian, the real Brian? He's disappeared. I was, Brian, can you share your screen with what we've been doing most recently? Or maybe you could go to the agenda and bring the agenda up.
I'm actually on my iPhone, but I did email everyone a copy of this, and I placed that the updated yellow amendments on the city website as well.
Can you bring that up, Sabrina?
I can, just give me 1 second.
That'd be great. If you could bring that up, then it's probably easier for everybody to follow in that way.
Just before we start in on this, I just wanted to make a comment in response to what Diane had mentioned as it pertains to the Code of Ethics and educational programs. You'll actually see in 3212 towards the way end of this, it's actually on the last page. Under educational programs, it indicates that the Board of Ethics shall hold or sponsor at least one educational program for a city and its employees and officers annually. And as it pertains to the public, we have a citizen's guide to the Code of Ethics that is available to the public, which is on the website, which you can Google and find as well. And we have the current Code of Ethics, which is being amended, and the Citizen's Guide, we have a current version, and we're in the process of amending that as well, so that both it and the Code of Ethics are identical and they're consistent.
Great. Thank you so much for making those points. I was going to make them myself, so I appreciate that you made them, and much better than I would have said. So thank you. So we're going through 3212, and I guess this has this isn't exactly the way the statute would change because it does have some of our notes within it. But Brian, do you kind of want to walk through us with this about just some of the highlights of the changes we're going to be making?
Sure. So if you take a look at the, first of all, I'd like to welcome Cara Murphy and Michael Church, and also our newest member, Tony Lopez, who joined us on short notice. This is actually his first meeting, even if it's not for Board of Ethics, it's still concerned the board. So Tony, welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for joining us.
If you take a look at the first page under appointment of members, there was a question about the language there. And basically I went back and I took a look at a lot of other commissions and committees that have language about the appointment of members in our ordinances. And this language is consistent, if not identical. It's consistent to many of the other ordinances that we have. So in terms of the first portion of the highlight in yellow, which starts discussing with each member shall serve for a 3-year term, and it goes on until it says to serve the balance of the term, and then there's a bracket. That bracket, I don't believe we have to adjust that language. I believe the first sentences that you find in the appointment of members is appropriate. And if you take a look at the last sentence in A, all appointments to the Board of Ethics shall require the affirmative vote of 11 members of the Common Council, and that's because you need a supermajority of the Common Council in order to be placed on the Board of Ethics, because obviously the Common Council and the city realizes that this is important. There was some language that would be crossed out of this, and that was simply for the fact that when this was created, they were creating a Board of Ethics, and we already have a Board of Ethics. So we don't have to worry about that language that has been crossed out, and I'll read it to you, except the original appointments. Replacement members shall be appointed each year after the effective date of the enactment of this chapter to serve for terms of 3 years. At the origination of the Board of Ethics after the first effective date of this amendment to Chapter 32, the Common Council shall appoint 2 members and 1 alternate for 3-year terms, 2 members for 2-year terms, and 1 member and 1 alternate for 1-year terms. We've already done all that. So the Board of Ethics is continuing, so that language really is no longer necessary. We'd only have to bring it back if the Board of Ethics was dissolved and then brought back again, and that's not what we're doing here. So I think basically there are no changes, and then there's some removal of some language which which is no longer necessary in appointment of members. Does anyone have any questions or comments about that?
You have a capital Y for year.
So year is a defined term.
It is, yeah.
So I went back and I made sure, going through 3212, because for those who weren't on the committee last time, portions of 3212 have already gone through the Ordinance Committee process and the Common Council process of approval. Those sections were amended and approved last year. But as you can see, a large portion of this, this is a very, very large section. And so most of it had not been discussed with the Ordinance Committee or the Common Council prior to this point.
Brian, this is Tom again. Just how do you define year in the?
Sure, let me just pull it up real quick.
It sounds like a stupid question, but I don't know that I want to make sure.
No. Let me just pull it up.
Councilman Livingston, my recollection is that we defined it so that it.
I have it. It says the municipal fiscal year is established by the
year, yeah.
Thank you.
statutes.
So is that right then? We appoint people in July 1?
Well, we appoint people now based on when their term expires. So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think you should capitalize it then.
Okay.
Because that means it's a 3 years, that year is 3 years starting July 1. Now they could be staggered, mind you, I understand that. But that means everybody's on July 1 term. I don't know if you mean that.
I don't mean that. That's a good point.
Yeah, because at later points in the ordinance, we do talk about years, and that might be appropriate to capitalize there. But yeah, I agree with you.
You're correct. It should have remained lowercase.
Okay. So we'll make that change.
Yep.
I have a quick question, Brian.
Yep.
The Ethics Committee is a council appointment or it's a mayoral appointment?
It's only council appointment.
So do we need to leave council because at the end there, all council appointments to the Board of Ethics? To define as a part of the definition of where that appointment comes from?
David, I took that out because that's when I read that it's an implication that there are council appointments and other appointments. That's why I suggested taking it out.
Where does it say in the upper language about appointments that it is appointed through or is there somewhere within the charter that says it is a council appointment?
Well, it says right there, all appointments that shall require the affirmative vote of 11.
So I guess what I should clarify is that Board of Ethics members have to be approved all appointments have to go through the Common Council. They're the final say in whether somebody will serve on the Board of Ethics.
Right, but we vote on mayoral appointments as well as council appointments, correct? There are mayoral appointments and then there are council appointments.
That is correct. There are appointments that the mayor will make that you guys have to approve, that the Common Council would have
That
to
we
approve.
have to approve. So my point is do we need to make a distinction here that the appointment and the putting forth of this name comes from the council?
All appointments to the Common.
Does that need to be distinguished, or is that not?
No, it's a good point, David. 1 second, let me take a look at it. What about all appointments to the Board of Ethics shall be made by the Common Council and shall require affirmative vote of 11 members of the Common Council?
That sounds good. Thank you.
All right, so all appointments to the Board of Ethics shall be made by the Common Council and shall require the affirmative vote of 11 members of the Common Council. Okay. Any other comments about appointment of members? Okay. So the next section is subsection B, which is organization. There were only some minor changes. One of the things that I wanted to make clear throughout was that when we're referring to the board, I just felt it was easier to refer to the board as the Board of Ethics so that there was no confusion as to what board we were referring to. So you'll see when a board is identified, they were discussing the Board of Ethics, but I thought it was clearer and people would not misunderstand if it says the Board of Ethics shall keep the minutes of its meetings, things of that nature. And of course, I missed one on the second line. It says, and the board shall hold full meetings at the call. So it should be, and the Board of Ethics shall hold meetings at the call of one. So then there was a question as to whether a full member or an alternate could call a meeting. So I don't know if Cara, Michael, or Tony would like to speak on that. It's in brackets, so just a question.
I think we can let Tony speak on that. He's well versed. The intent is a full member. The alternates don't have a vote.
Okay, so then we correctly identified that we needed to put, so it says one member. So I think in order to be clear that alternates can't call a meeting, that we should have one full member of the board at any such, and at such times as a majority of
The full members.
yeah, full members of the Board of Ethics. I missed that
Yeah.
one too.
Another one to pick up, right? And then there's a third one at the very end of the second to last line. Yep.
Absent member of the Board of Ethics.
Mhm.
So again, these are very minor changes here, but I think it'll help. And especially since in terms of people looking at ordinances, not that this happens very often, but the members of the public who might not be well versed in this process will look to the ordinance itself and also the citizens guide, but they end up going to the ordinance a lot more often because a lot of them don't know that there's a citizens guide. So I think it's definitely helpful to make clear that we're talking about the Board of Ethics whenever we're referring to the board, because we don't want the public to be confused about what board we're referring to.
Yeah, and we also have a hearing board that we discussed later. So just to keep it
Yeah,
clear.
so then there's also that confusion as well, since we have a Board of Ethics and a hearing board. Under subsection C, powers and duties, this talks about the powers and duties that the Board of Ethics has. And so you see that there's some minor changes here that are highlighted in yellow. And again, some capitalization for agency. So for example, agency is a defined term, officers are a defined term. And so there are very minor changes there. Does anyone have any comments about subsection C?
Question on the and, on the conjunction and hearings on complaint. I just wasn't sure. It was highlighted because.
Compliment.
You have highlighted and hearings on complaints. I wasn't sure why.
Oh, well, we added the end. That was an addition. So I was trying to highlight either removal of terms or the addition of terms. I was trying to highlight in yellow so it'd be easier for everyone to follow.
Brian, this is Dominique. I have a follow-up question about the last bit of language put into subsection C here.
Yes.
About the promoting a culture and operating environment of high ethical standards. I'll try to be succinct, but I know that the Board of Ethics is meant to ensure the Code of Ethics is implemented and oversight to the code. And in the code, we don't have provisions yet about social media use, electronic communication, especially on behalf of members who are representing the public in boards, commissions, council. So with that, do you interpret this language here in powers and duties to potentially apply to social media use by city representatives, employees, elected officials? Is that something we could safely interpret might be down the line, or is that just a separate ordinance altogether or a separate project altogether?
Well, I think one of the issues is one of the major things that the Board of Ethics does is they oversee complaints that are made. And so if someone's using their social media presence in terms of what they would be doing as part of their duties through this, as a representative of the city of Norwalk, then somebody could theoretically, if I'm answering, I don't know if I'm understanding your question, but somebody could say, you're violating the Code of Ethics by the way you're using your social media policy, social media account, and they could file a complaint in that way. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, I know my question was circuitous. Yeah, I think that is what I'm getting at. And I've looked over the Citizens Guide and I've read the code as it is, and it seems very muddy in terms of, let's say somebody's who elected to some position in Norwalk is using personal social media, there's intimidation, harassment, bullying. Is this the venue for somebody to file a complaint? And then has the board been empowered to oversee this process?
So in terms of, the board oversees officers and employees that have complaints filed against them. If this is a member of the public that is, in your hypothetical, harassing somebody, somebody couldn't file a complaint with violating the Code of Ethics if they are not an officer or employee of the city of Norwalk.
Okay, and that officer would cover elected officials?
So officer is a defined term. Let me just find it real quick.
It does cover elected officials.
It does, yes.
And when we wrote this language, it was a couple of years ago. And of course, technology, the use of apps, social media platforms, now Zoom and other platforms like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, those are all rapidly evolving technologies. So I think it's something that, we can take up if the chairman is so inclined.
Right.
Let me interject real quick. It's Michael Church. Part of when we wrote this whole thing, we didn't want to be too specific and too nuanced. We wanted to keep the ambiguity so it could be at the discretion of the Board of Ethics. So we didn't specify you could violate the ethics in the hour, in Nancy on Norwalk, in Facebook and Twitter. It's just in general, here's the guidelines to follow on any median and how to go about day-to-day life. We aren't, if somebody's harassing, things of that nature, that's a police issue. This is more ethical, doing things the right way, etc. So that's why there is that ambiguity to it. And yes, keeping up with technology, this covers that because, 16 years ago or so, there wasn't Facebook. 10 years ago, there wasn't Twitter. 2 years ago, there wasn't TikTok. So who knows what the next forum will be in the next 3 years. This does cover that if somebody's being unethical in those means.
Right, and if as Michael said, if we get very specific, then the argument would be, well, you identified 5 different medians, but you didn't identify the 6th one. And so
Correct.
the implication would be that it's not going to be covered. And so we also, one of the things that we've highlighted as we've gone through amending this code is that the Board of Ethics needs discretion. Whether the easiest example is when they're reviewing a complaint, they have to be given discretion. They can't be given every single hypothetical or every single situation. They have to be given discretion in order to determine whether to bring an investigating panel to investigate, and if they do bring an investigating panel, whether there's probable cause, and if it would get to a hearing board, whether there's been a violation in clear and convincing evidence. So in all of those situations, we try to have policies and procedures, but we try to keep them not vague, but we don't want to get them too specific, because otherwise people start to carve out exceptions saying, well, you made this exception, you made that exception, and we want to give the board discretion. So that's why we don't get very specific in this code.
Right, understood. And thank you for that confirmation.
Yep.
And just the ultimate goal then of my question was to make sure that this empowered the board to carry out the work, and it sounds as though that's the case. So thank you all for the input.
Yep.
I just have a quick question, Lisa. This is David Huebman. Brian, I see, officers being a designated term, employees. Does residents and vendors also need to be that way as well and capitalized?
So, basically we have employee and officer, because they're the ones that are subject to this code. We also have individual, which is a defined term, which is a natural person. We don't list residents or anything like that, because the people that are subject to this code are the officers and employees. Those are the ones who are subject to the code, and I don't think we need to define those other terms.
But if we're bringing them all together in this one sentence about educating, informing, and encouraging, aren't we then specifically speaking to those as designated?
I don't think so. I think this is like a, kind of proactive encouragement. I don't think that we don't discuss residents and vendors later in the document.
But
Okay.
actually, if I could, Tom Livingston, how would you define residents of City of Norwalk other than residents of City of Norwalk?
Well said, moving along.
So are there any other questions or comments about C, powers and duties? Okay. If you take a look at advisory opinions, which is subsection 1, again, these changes are pretty minimal. Again, identifying board to Board of Ethics. Advisory opinions are important. That means that people can reach out to the board and request an opinion as to whether what they would be doing would violate the Code of Ethics, so that they, if they're not sure, they can get a secondary opinion. And sometimes the Board of Ethics, if it's an extremely complicated legal question, can either use corporation counsel or retain their own counsel in order to answer the question. And one of the other things is that we want to promote people to ask these questions, advisory opinions. And so we want to prevent the disclosure or of the identity of an officer or employee, because otherwise they might be afraid to ask the question. And we'd rather them ask the question and get an answer so that they know what they're doing is either right or wrong, and they hopefully will choose the right way to do that after getting the guidance. And if you take a look, the last portion of this was deleted if agreed to by both the individual and the board. Again, we don't want somebody to come forward to ask a question to seek an advisory opinion and then be worried that the board will turn around and say, well, no, we're not going to prevent the disclosure of you asking this question. So again, I don't think it's a good idea to disclose this information when someone's trying to ask something in confidence to do the right thing. So that's why that language was removed at the end of 1 under advisory opinions. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
That looks good.
I couldn't agree more.
No comment. Agree
Okay.
with that. Agree with that.
Okay. Under 2 probable cause hearings, so obviously I missed this, but probable cause is a defined term, so I just capitalized the cause and probable cause. And then if you look under A, filing of the complaint, notification, and amendment, I changed it to, I capitalized it year to meet the definition. But I don't think that's accurate. I think I have to go back to year. And what I mean by that is there's a time period within which somebody can file a complaint. And I believe it's 6 months after. I'd have to go back and take a look. I can't remember. But basically when somebody leaves a board or a commission, you want the time to start running. If you were to leave prior to July 1st, if you left on March 1st, your board or commission, under this definition with it capitalized, it would, the preceding year would start to run from whenever that was. So we want it to be consistent for everybody. So whenever a person were to leave a board or commission, that should be the year that you could be subject to a complaint being filed, as opposed to minimizing it for some people or extending it past a year for others. So I think it should be a lowercase year. Let me know if everyone agrees or disagrees with that.
I agree with you about that. I think that's right.
Okay.
I agree with
I'm
that
fine
too.
with
So
that.
the next section under subsection B is review. Sorry. Review the complaint. This is one of the sections that had already been reviewed by the Ordinance Committee and approved by the Common Council. So basically there was an indication that it might be clear if we made the following correction to the second sentence, and I'd love to hear from other people as to what your thoughts are. So basically what this says is review the complaint. Upon receipt of a complaint, the Board of Ethics shall review the complaint and determine whether it warrants acceptance. If a majority of the members of the Board of Ethics present at the meeting reviewing said complaint determines that acceptance is not warranted, then it shall notify the complainant that it has refused to accept the complaint without establishing an investigating panel. If the Board of Ethics refuses to accept a complaint, it shall issue a written explanation of the reasons for such rejection. And so the procedure and policy, the reasoning for this was the basis behind this review of the complaint was discussed by the Ordinance Committee and approved by the Common Council last year. And this is just basically changing some of the language to make it sound a little bit clearer or more concise. So that first paragraph, let me know if anyone has any comments or questions. Okay. If you look at the second paragraph under review of complaint, it says the basis for which the Board of Ethics may refuse to accept such a complaint may include but not be limited to, and then it lists all of these items. And so basically it indicates in the first paragraph that the Board of Ethics is going to review the complaint and make a decision as to whether it's going to be accepted as warranted. And then the second paragraph is the basis, what they will consider when they're determining whether a complaint should be accepted. And then the third paragraph, the only change was instead of filer, to be consistent, we changed it to complainant, because the person who's filing is referred to as the complainant, both in the Code of Ethics and also in the Citizen's Guide to the Code of Ethics. Any questions or comments about the second and third paragraphs? Okay. Again, appointment of investigating panel. This is another subsection that was reviewed by the Ordinance Committee and approved by the Common Council last year. Again, I believe that this is just some clarification of the language, but it starts with an investigating panel shall be appointed within 21 days after the next regularly scheduled Board of Ethics meeting following receipt of a complaint by the Board of Ethics. And so basically the change last year by the Ordinance Committee was, and requested by the board, was that they wanted 21 days after their next meeting, because we theoretically could get a hypothetical complaint right after the last meeting, and they don't meet again for another 30 days. And so therefore, the timing of this would not work. So they needed additional time, especially since this is a volunteer board, and there are times where they do not meet. There might not be a meeting of one over the summer, and there might not be one towards the end of the year. So we wanted to make sure that the appointment process of an investigating panel was reasonable to them and could be followed, and yet wouldn't be so adverse to the complainant that it would be sitting around for a long period of time. This would not be a long period of time. No members of the investigating panel. So I think there's an issue here because we have a double negative. So it says no members of the investigating panel shall not serve or have served within 1 year as officers, employees from the agency at which the complainant or respondent serves or formerly served within 1 year as an officer or an employee. So the first thing that I would say is that year should not be capitalized. Again, it shouldn't be less or more for people. It should be 1 year from the date that you stopped working or serving. But I think we need to change. No members of the investigating panel shall serve or have served within 1 year. I think we just have to get rid of the not. Let me know if anyone disagrees.
Yep.
Correct.
Okay.
No, that's correct.
Alleged. Okay, so it says no members of the investigating panel shall serve or have served within 1 year as an officer or employee from the agency at which the complainant or respondent serves or formerly served within 1 year as an officer or employee. I think we can get rid of that. The next part, alleged to be involved in, or do we need that? Help me out here.
Right.
Does everyone see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Just reading it over.
Yep, okay.
I have a question about intent, Ryan, if I might. Is that
Sure.
Go
is
ahead.
is the intent here to make sure that we don't have anyone directly involved, right, in the complaint?
Yes. Yeah,
Or
so
I guess,
I'll give you a hypothetical.
Yeah.
Somebody files a complaint, a complainant files a complaint against a complainant files a complaint against a respondent. Somebody who serves on the Board of Ethics might know one of those people. And so that person would not get involved either in the investigating panel or on the hearing board because we don't want, even if there might not be a conflict, but we don't want the appearance of a conflict either. We want this to be completely people that who make these decisions there's no argument that they are neutral.
I think it's okay to leave it.
Right, and
Okay.
yeah.
All right, so we'll just.
I would leave
Clarifying it.
Yep.
Can we clarify to, I mean, should it read who is alleged?
Who is alleged to be involved? Tony, I think you're on mute.
Tony, you're on mute.
Sorry, I meant to provide more clarity. Yes, no?
Yeah. Who is alleged to be involved? Is that what you're saying, Tony?
Yes.
Okay. What does everyone else think of that?
I differ. I think because we're talking about the complaint of a respondent, that is the person alleged to be involved in the facts of the complaint.
Right.
Brian,
Okay.
No. I think we take out the last part of the sentence after alleged on. I think it should
So
be
from
removed.
alleged, remove alleged. Is that what you're saying, Tom?
I'm saying remove alleged to the end of that sentence to employees. I don't think it adds anything.
Right. So from alleged all the way to employees. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
What does everyone else think of that?
I mean, I do think it's redundant of the idea. I think Tom's right about that. I don't think it hurts, but I think it is. redundant.
I
Okay,
think
well,
the-
That sounds better. It provides clarity.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's go
All
to
right, so we'll remove that. The rest of the paragraph remains the same. And so now we're on, if there's no other comments, we'll move to subsection 3A, which is investigation of complaint, notification of parties, investigating panel. There are no changes that I can see to 3A, notification of parties, unless someone has a comment specifically about this. I'll move on to B.
That'd be great. No changes.
Okay. So B is expansion of complaint by investigating panel. And so there's very minor changes here. But it says subsequent to the filing of the original complaint, the investigating panel or the Board of Ethics may at its discretion supplement or expand such complaint to include. So we just removed some language there to make it flow a little bit better. If anyone disagrees with that, let me know and we can talk about it.
I think we can keep moving.
Okay. Subsection 4 is investigation of probable cause, confidentiality of initial proceedings. Again, probable cause is capitalized here. We capitalize respondent, and then the request instead of request by the respondent. So the request by the respondent for a public hearing shall waive the confidentiality requirement. Just for people who aren't aware, the investigating panel's investigation of any complaint is confidential unless the respondent, the person who has been alleged to have done the wrong, wants it to be public. It would not become public until it got to a hearing board, and that would mean that probable cause would have to be found that there was a violation of the code of ethics by the investigating panel. The hearing board would be public, their hearing, but not the investigating panel. And the idea is that you don't want somebody to have a complaint filed against them that has no merit or no probable cause and have their name be out there. Does anyone have any questions about those 3 paragraphs under subsection 4?
I think those are pretty good. So the next section is we've
Okay.
got a little bit more changes, right?
So this is determination of probable cause, written report, and hearing board. So
If you could keep moving it up,
You can
Sabrina.
see
Yeah, there
that-
we go. Thank you.
yeah, you can see that the change here, it's
Needs to go,
so
keep up.
subsection A sentence at the end of the subsection, and you can see that that was basically taken from the Roman numeral (2), finding a probable cause. And so determination of probable cause, written report, and hearing board. So the final sentence says, a finding that there is probable cause to believe that the respondent has violated the code of ethics shall require 2 affirmative votes from the members of the investigating panel. Again, you need there's 3 people on the investigating panel. In order to find probable cause, you would need the majority of them. It doesn't have to be unanimous. We need a majority, 2 members. And just so everyone's aware, an investigating panel or a hearing board can only have 1 Democrat, 1 Republican, and the other person have to be an independent or unaffiliated. You can't have more than 1 political party on either board. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay, so the first subsection we're dealing with is there's a finding of no probable cause, meaning the investigating panel has looked into the complaint and there's no probable cause. We just shortened the title of this section, removed before an ethics hearing board, and we added a copy in the middle of that little paragraph in order to make that sound right. And instead of ethics board, we used Board of Ethics to be consistent. If no one has any comments, we'll go down. This one had a little bit more changes, finding a probable cause. In this one, it's talking about if the investigating panel determines that there is probable cause, that the respondent has violated the code of ethics, it's going to submit a written report to the Board of Ethics stating the basis. And upon receipt of that report, the Board of Ethics shall appoint a hearing board, which shall initiate a public hearing within, it says 30 days. I crossed it out with 45 days from the appointment to determine, from the appointment of the hearing board to determine whether there has been a violation. The days should really be discussed by the Board of Ethics and by the Ordinance Committee as to the amount of days that you want. The concern is you don't want to keep it so short that it hamstrings the Board of Ethics, and you don't want to get it so long that it draws out this process even further. So I'd love to hear what people's thoughts are about that, especially Board of Ethics people.
Well,
Yeah, we
considering
just
it,
picked
the
45
board
days as we
needs-
discussed it. All right, go ahead. Oops.
Well, are there any questions related to that?
We're just
No, I was
curious,
just
if
trying
we
to
picked
figure
45
out-
days, we just want to make, yeah. Sorry, Brian, you go ahead, Brian.
No, I just want to make sure that the Board of Ethics would have sufficient time to appoint a hearing board. So it's similar to the concern about the 21 days after receipt of the complaint, that we extended it out 21 days after the Board of Ethics next meeting. Again, this 45 days gives, with 30 days, it could theoretically come right at the end of one Board of Ethics meeting, in which a special meeting would have to be put together in order to get that within the time period. Was with 45 days, you have, even if it's right after that meeting, you would still have an additional 15 days buffer before the next meeting. So that was the thought behind
Another
45 days.
Also, along with the 45 days, is if we get a notification November 20th, we have Thanksgiving, Christmas in that 30-day window. This gets us
Right.
beyond New Year's Day, just as an example.
I
Right.
agree,
There was
45
also-
days is very reasonable.
Yeah, there was also concern about the word process being a little ambiguous, and so this is a more definitive. You have to initiate a public hearing. That's why a little more days makes more sense, I think.
Right. Does anyone have any other comments about this? Okay. So the next subsection 5 talks about extensions of time to the hearing board. In this section, So in this section, basically, after receipt by the hearing board of the probable cause finding by the investigating panel, meaning they found probable cause that the respondent has done something, they're going to send notice of that probable cause to both the complainant and respondent within 10 business days of the receipt. Hypothetically speaking, if this were to happen, the investigating panel could reach out to me, and I could send a letter to both the respondent and complainant and copy those investigating panel members so that they're aware that it has been done timely. And so that was just, again, there was some just minor changes to language in this section. Does anyone have any comments about notice of probable cause findings to complainant and respondent? Okay. Again, under hearing, subsection B, very minor changes again. One of the things that I, changed, which you'll see, it's the last sentence, and I'll read it. The investigating panel, complainant and respondent shall have the right to present evidence and witnesses subject to the rules and regulations adopted by the Board of Ethics under this Code of Ethics. My thought process behind crossing out the complainant is this. The complainant has brought the complaint. The investigating panel has investigated and found probable cause. The investigating panel becomes the prosecutor. So the example that I would give is the best way to follow this is like a criminal example where somebody alleges a complaint and the cops investigate and they hand it over to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor goes to a grand jury, which is private, which is secret, like an investigating panel. And then once they get the blessing that there has been probable cause, that prosecutor goes on and prosecutes the case. And the complainant would be one of the witnesses. So the complainant in this situation wouldn't be wouldn't be presenting evidence. They would be one of the witnesses who could testify and or provide documentation through examination by the investigating panel. So really, the investigating panel becomes the prosecutorial branch, is the best way to put it, in a hearing board setting. But the respondent has the right to present evidence and defend him or herself, and they have the right to do that either pro se or with an attorney. So that's why the complainant was removed. Does anyone have any comments or questions?
Brian, we intentionally put the complainant into the process so that they would be
Okay.
invested in the process from the beginning to end. But if the ordinance committee feels differently, or that's fine. But I'm just giving you the background of our thinking several years ago when we did this.
No,
Yeah,
and
we
and
were
in
concerned
fairness,
because depending
in
upon who the
fairness, yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
I was just going to say, when we were going through this, our concern was depending upon who the complainant is, it's not, we would be concerned about who would be prosecuting a case against respondents. And so we felt that the investigating panel is charged with that, and it's best placed there rather than get individual employees and officers in that role.
So in
That's
fairness,
fine. That's why we're discussing it.
yeah. So the Board of Ethics had started this process before I came on board. So there's obviously going to be some differences, but I understand the other point, which is if a complainant does bring a complaint, they do have a vested interest. And, you know, the concern would be from the other side of it, that if you remove their ability to present evidence or witnesses at the hearing in front of the hearing board, that perhaps they lose interest because they feel that the investigating panel isn't going to do the job that they would have done, or they feel like they're less invested, then perhaps they won't even show up, which kind of defeats the purpose. So there's that concern as well, that you definitely want them to be a part of this process. So that's the other side of it. So thank you, Cara, for raising that.
Well, wouldn't the complainant be a witness in almost any case?
Yes. So there's
It would
two
be.
sides
That's how
to
they
this.
brought the complaint in the first place.
Right.
Well, I'm interested to hear what other people have to say, but I would be very concerned with having the complainant taking an prosecutorial role in an ethics complaint. I think that could well devolve into something that's a little out of control.
I
Yeah,
understand your concerns as well. So,
Especially depending, I mean, we can't pick our complainants.
Yeah, I agree with that as well too. Manny Langella here. I don't know, for some reason my name is showing as Brian Candela, but no, I agree with that as well. And I would think that the complainant would have a vested interest from the beginning and should be in a position to present ample evidence before bringing it before it comes to a hearing.
Yep. And Manny, you're correct. Yeah, so Manny, you're correct. Sorry.
Go ahead, Brian.
Sorry about that. Manny brought up a good point that, one of the things that we were talking about was the Board of Ethics has the right to reject a complaint that's filed by a complainant, but they also have the right to turn back to the complainant and say, listen, you don't have enough. We'd be looking for you to provide additional information, or we need additional information in order to set up an investigating panel. So in that regard, the investigating panel and the Board of Ethics does have some discretion, but at this point, the investigating panel would have found probable cause. So the concern there, I don't think there would be much concern that the investigating panel wouldn't have an interest in prosecuting this in front of the hearing board, having found that they believe that there was at least probable cause to find that there was some potential misconduct.
But Brian, there's a qualifier there too, which helps as well. The qualifier where it suggests subject to the rules and regulations, which is, I believe you might be alluding to indirectly. Yes, no?
Okay, so right, so subject to the rules and regulations would discuss, and that's further down. That's also mentioned further down in this the Code of Ethics 3212, where it discusses what are the rules and regulations for how a hearing board proceeding would go forward. So basically,
Brian, David,
testimony. Go ahead.
Sorry, Brian, David Huleman here. Just so I'm understanding, if we're already at this point where we're in a hearing, the investigative panel has met and feels that that there's something to move forward to a hearing, correct?
Mhm. Yes,
Right.
yes.
They're
They
prosecuting
would,
it at this
the
point.
investigating panel has to find, yeah. Sorry.
Okay, so then, then I agree with striking complainant at this point because the complainant now becomes a witness within this proceeding, correct?
Yep,
Yes.
that's my understanding
And,
too.
you know, just as an aside, the investigating panel, when they receive a hypothetical complaint, is going to, they're not just going to take the complaint at face value. They're going to request documents if they believe that those documents are necessary, if they exist. And they also have the right to meet with a complainant and the respondent as well. They have the right to interview those people. And those people have the right to ask the investigating panel to meet with them so they can get their side of the story. So that this way the investigating panel has both sides before they come to a decision.
Thank you.
Yep. So under evidence burden of proof, there really aren't many changes except for in conducting such hearings, the investigating panel shall have the burden of proving the claim. The respondent doesn't have the burden of proof at a hearing board. It's the investigating panel. They have to prove it by clear and convincing evidence. It's no longer probable cause. It's clear and convincing evidence.
Sabrina, if you could bring up the sheet again a little higher. Keep going, Brian. We'll catch up with you.
Yep.
Hopefully Sabrina can move that.
No,
forward.
that's fine. So there's really no changes except for the fact that investigating panel replaced complainant. Under subsection D, the written decision of the hearing board, after the hearing is completed, it might be one night, it might be multiple nights, depending on the size of the issues. The hearing board has to render a decision. They have to write a decision, and that decision has to be provided. Let's see, it has to be provided to the complainant and respondent, and it would also have to be provided to the mayor, the city clerk, and the corporation counsel's office. And so we're going to be talking about, I think a little bit later, how much time the hearing board has to render its decision after the hearing proceeding is complete. And I think it says right here, within 30 days of such determination, if the hearing board determines a violation of the code of ethics has been proven by clear and convincing evidence, the hearing board shall, within 30 days after such determination, state its findings and conclusions of law and writing. So they have 30 days after to write their decision. Any comments there? Okay. Subsection E is extension of time. We're indicating that the hearing board has the right to grant extensions of time by a majority vote of the hearing board. Again, there's going to be 3 members of the hearing board. And extensions of time could be granted because they need to set up a proceeding where you're going to have multiple people that have to appear, whether they be the complainant, the respondent, and or other witnesses, and also to possibly obtain documents prior to that hearing or proceeding. So extensions of time can be granted. But the hearing board has to give notice to the complainant and respondent of those extensions of time. And the other thing was in subsection little 3 was the concern that you wanted to give the a similar concern. You wanted to give the hearing board enough time in order to get this done because they're volunteers. But you also wanted to have an end date. You wanted to set it up so that a respondent and a complainant knows that at some point this is all going to end. And so that's why in subsection 3, we said, notwithstanding any extension of time, a ruling on the action must be rendered within 120 days of the appointment of the hearing board. So it gives them 4 months in order to get this done from when they're appointed. And so again, if anyone has strong feelings about the amount of days or any of these changes, please let me know and we can discuss it.
Just the reason we picked 120 days is because that's the number of days that a superior court judge uses to or has to make a decision on a motion or a courtside trial. That's where the
Thank you,
120
Cara.
days came from.
Yes, and I think it's also a fair number for the hearing board because they have to set this up. So 30 days of it, they have up to 30 days to write their decision after they make it. So now you're down to 90 days. So again, we want to give them some time in order to get this done so they could be done right.
Hey, Brian, this is Tom Livingston. Can you make, instead of ruling, say decision? Because it's not clear to me
Yes.
whether the ruling is written or not. Just to make the decision must be is it reached or rent. I don't know if it's rendered or reached. But
Maybe we should we say a written decision?
well,
the action
gets
must
to
be
that
rendered
30
Yeah.
That cuts out 30 days. I mean, or at least 20. That's why I think you want to just have it. I'm thinking back when you have to give the written decision of the hearing board. You first tell people what the decision is, then you have 30 days to write it up. I think the important thing here is you get the ruling, the oral decision, if you will. That's why I say a decision.
So Tom, changing to the decision, would that mean that in 120 days we would have an indefinite decision?
Yeah, and what I'm saying, yes, and I'm saying is if you left it, if you waited for the written decision, I mean, that cuts out, it could cut out up to 30 days, right? Because then it basically have to be done in 90 days. Or could be. I mean, it moves around, but I think this gives the most flexibility by saying decision versus ruling.
Right. It does, and you know, my feeling is that the hearing board is going to be able to make a written decision. I don't think it's going to be. I mean, it's not going to be a sentence, but it's also not going to be 50 pages long. I think the written decision just has to discuss the facts and how they came to their decision. I don't think it can't be short, but it also doesn't have to be extremely long either. So hopefully such a decision wouldn't take them that long to draft.
Brian, I can talk to the members themselves. I mean, if you don't think it's an issue, so I won't argue. I mean, I just seemed to me, I was trying to give more flexibility to the ethics.
I don't disagree. I think more flexibility to them is better.
My only thought on the word. Sorry.
I was going to say, so just so we understand, so we're calling it written decision of the hearing board. And then in that paragraph D, we say the hearing board shall, this is yellow, within 30 days after such determination. We should probably say decision again there, right? Instead of determination, just to make it clear that we're always talking about such determination. And then picking up Tom's comment under E3, we should say, notwithstanding the foregoing, a decision must be rendered within 120 days. So use the word decision in all of those instances.
Right.
Okay.
Correct. Yep.
My only thought was that I think it's more of a legal terminology. I'm not an attorney. I don't pretend to be one. I just thought that ruling is typically used. And so I don't know, how much more appropriate it is, or if it's a question of semantics.
Well, my concern.
We should use the same word, whatever we use, right?
Right.
And we called it a
try to
written
be as
decision.
consistent as possible.
Yeah, I think written decision. Let's stay with that.
Yeah. So if you take a look, it says in subsection D, about middle of the way down, it says, if the hearing board determines a violation of the code of ethics has been proven by clear and convincing evidence, the hearing board shall, within 30 days after such decision, state its findings of fact and conclusions of law in writing and shall specify the code section violated. And then we say in subsection 3 under E, a decision must be rendered within 120 days of the appointment. So between those two, it's clear that the decision means a statement of its findings of facts and conclusion of law in writing. It shall specify the code section violated.
Yeah, because they call it a memorandum of decision as well. So just let's use the word decision consistently.
Okay. And then in subsection 6, rules and procedures for public hearings, there were no changes in subsection A. Does anyone have any comments about subsection A?
No.
Okay. Under subsection B, it says rights of investigating panel and respondent. And again, we took out complainant and put the investigating panel and respondent shall have the right in any such hearing before the hearing board, and it says to be represented by counsel, to present oral or written documentary evidence, to examine and cross-examine, which are all of the things that would be available to somebody if they were to appear in court and had a trial in court.
Brian, it's Dominique. A quick
Under-
question about the,
Yep, sure.
oh, are you sure? Hi, Car.
Yep, go ahead.
The Zoom lag here. All right, just a quick follow-up about the comment made about shifting the burden of proof, and just curious about the decision-making on that, and if it's still relevant in this newest iteration.
I can't see, hold on.
So the reason why we shifted the burden of proof to the investigating panel is because they're the prosecutors of the ethical violation. And we're just being consistent with that.
Right, that's an old comment from 3 years ago to the Corporation Counsel's office, and there's new thinking now, so I see that comment. It just wasn't removed from the draft, but based on the discussions tonight, it's irrelevant.
Great, thank you very much for that conference.
Under evidentiary rules, basically the majority of the hearing board will determine whether evidence comes in or not. And the way we discuss this, and Carr and Michael can confirm this or correct me, when we discussed this at the Board of Ethics meeting, the way that we described this this hearing proceeding in front of the hearing board was similar to what would be an arbitration or a trial in front of a small claims magistrate, where the rules of evidence will be applied in a very relaxed format, where it would be more that the evidence goes to the weight, not the admissibility. Meaning, unless something is completely out of left field and has nothing to do with this, if it's remotely relevant, let the hearing board make the decision as to whether they're going to hear it or not, and they can just determine it whether admit it in if they decide to do that, and then they can determine the credibility and weight of that document and/or testimony when they have a chance to hear it. But it's really, again, we want to give discretion to the hearing board, and we want to apply the rules of evidence in a lax format, because somebody might be, investigating panel might not be lawyers, and the person who's a respondent defending themselves might not be able to afford a lawyer or might not want a lawyer. And so you don't want to have these rigid evidentiary rules that could slow the process down even further.
I would agree with that. Right now we have 3 lawyers on the Board of Ethics, but that doesn't mean we will in the future. And for the respondent and for the claimant, they don't necessarily have to bring a lawyer. A lawyer is welcome. So keeping it more relaxed enables people to prove their case a little bit easier.
Right.
I don't know if Michael has
and then if you,
feeling on that.
Yeah.
I echo the sentiments.
Okay, great.
If you take a look at rules of procedure, this is something that that the Board of Ethics we're going to have to discuss about whether we have to write down what the rules of procedure are going to be based on what this ordinance says. The Board of Ethics shall have the power to adopt and amend rules of procedure for hearings conducted pursuant to the Code of Ethics, provided such rules are approved by a majority of the entire Common Council. You can see that I crossed out publication of it in a newspaper of general circulation. That's not required by the charter. And, we could, as a courtesy, we could identify on city website or by way of Nancy on Norwalk, or attach these guidelines or rules to the Citizens Guide to the Code of Ethics for a way that the public would be able to see it as well. But that was the thought process behind that. that there probably should be at least something, even if it's very general, so that people have an idea of the rules that they're going to, and regulations that they're going to have to deal with if they do get to a hearing board.
And of course, we're trying to
It's
save money
not-
by not publishing.
Yes. Because it's every time it's at least a couple $100.
Yeah, very expensive.
Does anyone have any questions about rules of procedure?
No, it's not unusual for administrative agencies to have rules of conduct.
Right.
If you go to any administrative agency in the state, they have them on their website. You know, DEEP has them. Other agencies, DPH has them, and you just look them up.
That'd be great.
And then if you take a look at the next couple sections, there really aren't that many changes. Obviously, subsection E is due process, which is very important. We want to make sure that everyone feels like they're getting a fair shake, and that's why we want the Board of Ethics and the investigating panel and the hearing board to have discretion and to request more documents or information in order for the complainant to pursue their case, and also to make sure that by requesting that information that there is sufficient evidence so that the respondent isn't dragged through the mud needlessly. One change would be complainant is singular, so we're going to make respondent singular as well in subsection E, the due process section. Recording and transcription of the hearing just talks about the hearing board. The complainant or the respondent or the investigating panel or a member of the hearing board at their request can have the hearing recorded. But that's going to be the cost is going to go to the party requesting it. And I think that's fair. It's a public hearing, so it can be recorded, but the person who's requesting should have to bear the cost of that. The hearing board can issue subpoenas. That's in subsection G. There were no changes there. Public rights of access is subsection H. And again, a public hearing is public, so the decision is also going to be public no matter what the result is. The investigating panel is confidential. There is a change under subsection 7 if nobody has any comments, which is stipulations of parties and settlement. It indicates the change is that at any time after an ethics complaint has been made, the Board of Ethics investigating panel or the hearing board may accept stipulated findings and or settlement from a respondent. So basically what that means that the Board of Ethics, the investigating panel or the hearing board can accept a resolution or a stipulation or a settlement from a respondent if they so choose. It says may. It doesn't say shall, so they have discretion there. It's very similar to when somebody wants to plead guilty to something and they ask the prosecutor whether this is something that they support. The judge still can say, I don't like this plea. So it's, or settlement, a resolution of the claim. So that's where that thought process came from. And so the annual report talks about the report that we submitted to the Common Council with a summary of our activities. We had a conversation about this the last time. The Board of Ethics deals with a lot of stuff that is confidential, whether it's advisory opinions or investigate or theoretical hypothetical complaints. So while the Board of Ethics can provide some information, they can't provide all information of all the things that they've been doing. So just I'll leave that at that. Does anyone have any comments or questions about annual report?
I think capital Y for years probably right there.
Yeah, I finally got it right. And then finally, this was something that I mentioned earlier in response to Diane. One of the things is that the Board of Ethics has been trying very hard for the last couple of years to update this code and make sure that it's as good as it can be, and to simultaneously update the Citizens Guide to the Code of Ethics. And one of the real great things that they've done, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to show all of you after the fact, is that we made the diagrams and the explanations to help a citizen go through this to make it a lot clearer. what I'll probably end up doing is I'll probably print out a version of what we have currently and show you the final version once it's done. But the Citizens Guide to the Code of Ethics has to mirror the Code of Ethics. And so 32.4 and 32.8, which are the final two sections which have not been finalized yet, need to be finalized before that Citizens Guide can be completed. And so we'll have, once that's all done, we'll have a complete Citizens Guide and an updated Code of Ethics. And I think that the Citizens Guide so far has been updated in a way that will be extremely helpful to people that don't know how to navigate this this maze. Does anyone have any
Brian,
comments?
that was really good work. That's a lot of work. I appreciate so much your help and Tom's help in going through this very long section. Any other general comments from the Board of Ethics? So we also really appreciate your efforts and your comments on this.
And just so I can say thank you to all of the Board of Ethics members who are here, all the Board of Ethics members who aren't here that still serve, and the ones who were serving that participated in this process. This has been going on for many years, and they've been extremely patient to try and get this done. So, and they've been extremely helpful to me and corrected many of my mistakes. So I would just like to say thank you to all of them.
Yeah, thank you to everybody.
I'd just like to
very difficult.
Point out and thank Mickey Colazar, who is on most of this call as an attendee. He is on the Board of Ethics. Thank Cara and Brian for all his great work with this. And thank you guys, Ordinance Committee, for taking the time to review this and move this along so that we can get to the educating with this updated Code of Ethics.
Yeah, that's great. Well, with that, and assuming that we make all of the changes that we've discussed with Brian, I guess the next thing to do is to see if we have a motion to move it to public hearing at our next meeting. Thank you, David, for making that motion. And Tom says I don't have to second, but if I do have to second, Manny will be the second. And great. So all in favor, I'm going to call the attendance again. David?
Aye.
Yes. Aye. Dominique?
Yes.
Thank you. Tom Keegan? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Manny?
Yes.
Thank you. Tom Livingston?
Yes.
Kadeem Roberts?
Aye.
Thank you. And Lisa, I'm also going to vote to send it along. So by unanimous vote, that goes on to our public hearing at our next meeting. Now we're to
Thank
our
you, everybody.
last. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And thank you very much to the ethics people who I'm sure have better things to do. So thank you for joining us.
Thank
you.
Now
Thank you,
it's
Board of
Jessica's turn.
Ethics.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate the
Thank you, Board of
explanations
Ethics.
as well too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
All right. So
Thank
we're
you.
moving to our last item today is the discussion and vote on the enterprise zone. So thank you, Jessica, for attending. And I guess maybe Sabrina can pull up the PowerPoint that you have for us.
Thank you to
Or maybe-
Sabrina and Jessica for being so patient.
Yeah, exactly.
of
I know.
course.
We
No
should buy you
problem.
dinner. It's well after dinner time.
Perfect. Actually, maybe what I'll do, Sabrina, is maybe I'll get it up on my screen, and then that way it's not a PowerPoint, or it's not a PDF. Maybe it might look a little bit cleaner. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Can everyone see that?
I can, yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. A little bit cleaner. So a number of things that we want to talk to you about tonight regarding the enterprise zone. And I should give a little bit of background first and foremost, but we've been talking for a long time in the city about different economic development tools. And one of those tools that we've been talking about was expanding the enterprise zone, and that was in 2016. And at that point in time, it was determined that the enterprise zone should not be expanded, but it was that sort of pivoted into a secondary conversation, which included the tax abatement program for Wall Street West Ave. And the Ordinance Committee, probably about a year or so ago, went through a lot of the language related to the tax abatement ordinance. And it got very complicated very quickly. And so we backed out of that and said, let's reassess. Let's look at what the enterprise zone is doing in South Norwalk. Let's get some data behind us, understand what it's done, and then decide if we wanted to bring forward an expansion, a proposed expansion of the enterprise zone again. So the presentation that you're going to see relates to a proposal to expand the enterprise zone from the South Norwalk area to the Wall Street West Ave area. And we're going to offer information about what the enterprise zone is, where the existing enterprise zone is in Norwalk, what the proposed expansion is, and answer some questions related to some of the ordinance language that would need to be changed if this proposal went through. So with that, it's been great to be in Norwalk over the last year and a half or so, because we've seen so much progress when it comes to economic development tools. And these things were far, far in the works before I ever got here, before the restructuring ever happened. But just to give you a sense, Norwalk has a number of different economic development tools in place. The enterprise zone was originally adopted in 1982. And then we kind of had a bit of a hiatus in enterprise zone, in economic development tools. And in 2017, the Opportunity Zone program was passed by the federal government with different census tracts here in Norwalk. But since 2019, we've taken a real, I would say almost a real pivot or a real major step in being able to think about economic and community development, specifically in the Wall Street West Ave area. So in May 2019, we adopted a redevelopment plan. June 2019, zoning was adopted in the Central Business District, which includes Wall Street West Ave. In part of what we heard when we did the tax abatement discussions through the Ordinance Committee was a lack of tools specifically for small businesses. So we had heard that if there was a business that was leasing space, or a business that had just got up and got started, that there weren't as many tools in Norwalk as there could be for folks that were looking for support, that some of the tools that we had were larger investment tools. So we worked for a long time to create a set of tools that were economic community development tools specific to small business in Main Street. And that's what we launched in 2019 in November. The Plan of Conservation Development was passed in December 2019, but of course that was a 3-year effort in talking to the public and understanding what they wanted to see for economic community development across the city. And there's a whole chapter in there that speaks to economic development and the economic development tools that can be used. And so I wanted to kind of highlight that there are a number of tools for economic community development. A lot of them are policy-based. Some of them are program-based as far as grants go, small grants go, but it showcases sort of where we've been headed and what areas we've been focused on. So we talked specifically about the enterprise zone. What is it? It's an area in which local tax incentives are offered to encourage business investment and jobs for residents in disadvantaged census tracts. This is not the city of Norwalk's definition. This is really a state statute definition, a state program definition. When it comes to disadvantaged census tracts, we'll get into what those are and how they're identified. Again, it's not a city of Norwalk criteria that is actually put forward. It's a state statute that's put forward that sets forward not only this definition and this goal, but also the criteria itself. So when we apply an enterprise zone, basically what happens is that the taxes on the improvements to any of the property within the geography are deferred for a period of 7 years. So if a private development or a private developer comes in, a private party comes in, they actually apply, the assessment is done on the property, and they have to apply through the redevelopment agency. The redevelopment agency would approve the project. It is by right. And essentially once they get their final certificate of occupancy, it's the first year that the enterprise zone abatement kicks in. So the property is assessed beforehand and the property is assessed after the improvement takes place. So the deferment is actually on that, on the difference between the two. And again, this is set by state statute. This is not a City of Norwalk definition. The 100% in the first 2 years down to 10% abatement in the 7th year. That again is set out by state statute. So these are pieces of the state statute that different municipalities have adopted to be able to implement the enterprise zone.
Hey, Jess, it's Tom Livingston. Just looking at your chart here for a second, I'm a little confused. It's the 1 and 2 years. It says the first year is pre-construction. Shouldn't this be like the pre-construction to the left of the axis? Because isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so it is the
Yep,
2
it
years.
should be.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, and then year 1 is actually starting at year 2, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the 2 years here, it's the 2 years once you've got your CO, right?
That's right. So it would be like year 2, the CO comes into place, and then you're right.
Yeah, okay, so this is not quite, yeah, maybe.
We can fix that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no, good catch. Thank you very much. So when we talk about the enterprise zone, it is by right. It's by right for census tracts that have the enterprise zone adopted. They're, again, based on state statute, the census tract has to hit one of 3 criteria. The first criteria being that 25% or more of people are below the poverty level in the census tract. The second is that 25% or more of the families receive public assistance or welfare income. And the third is the unemployment rate is at least 200% of the state's average. So for a census tract to be eligible, it doesn't need to hit all 3 or even 2 of 3. It just needs to hit one of the 3. Just to give you a sense, in Connecticut, 17 municipalities have enterprise zones. They basically adopt them on the state statute. The state statute offers the language, much of the language from this particular slide with the abatement schedule. And also they have to fall within, all those census tracts need to actually fit within the criteria itself. So if we were to look at the City of Norwalk, and we were to look at the urban core area, all of Norwalk itself, we see that the urban core to a large extent actually hits one of the 3 criteria. So for all of the census tracts that are in red, those are the census tracts that hit one of the 3 criteria. So we have 0 of the 8 census tracts meet the criteria of 25% or more below the poverty level, although 437, which is the Wall Street West Ave area census tract, is very close at 24.2. 4 of the 8 census tracts meet the 25% or more families receiving public assistance or welfare income. And for unemployment rate, at least 200% of the state's average, 7 out of 8 meet that particular variable. So a question that we've received a lot lately is, what about COVID-19 pandemic, and specifically the 3rd bullet point, which is the unemployment rate is at least 200% of the state's average. So there are a couple things to note on that. One is that if Norwalk's unemployment rate we hit 7 out of 8 on that particular one. But if that was to change, it's very likely that the number of families receiving public assistance or welfare income, and also 25% more people below the poverty line, those will also go up. And we'll show specifically the criteria for the Wall Street West Ave area in a couple slides, but I want to just comment on it here. So if 3 goes up, then it's likely 2 and 1 will go up as well. The second thing I think to note is that these are not based on specific real-time information. The criteria are based on census information that comes through. So what would be used is the ACS data, which is the American Community Survey data, that is a snapshot in time, much like Census 2020. They'll do the census form and then they'll extrapolate the data by geography, by census tract for the next 10 years. So I just want to make note of that, because I know that there's been a lot of questions about, well, what will Norwalk look like with the COVID-19 pandemic, and will we still meet the criteria? And the answer is yes, we will still meet the criteria. And even if our variables were to change and the eligibility was to change based on criteria, it's actually based on that snapshot in time on the ACS data, which is not changing. So this is the existing enterprise zone. It was originally adopted in 1982. It was changed, I believe, in the 90s or early 2000s at some point in time, but this is the general area that has been adopted. So it includes 2 census tracts, 441 and 445, and it has a pretty, not that wonky is a technical word, but I guess has a pretty wonky boundary. It follows MLK on the west side, and it follows I-95 on the north side. It follows the Norwalk River on the east side to Back Street, Burritt Ave, and then along Woodward Ave to Dock Road, and then along the waterfront again to Route 136. So these are census tract delineated boundaries. They're not boundaries that the city specifically drew on a map to ask for the enterprise zone to be expanded here. It is based on what that census tract boundary looks like. And when you expand into a census tract or accept a census tract for the enterprise zone, you accept the whole census tract. So it's not that you would choose specific pieces of the boundary. So we wanted to present to you some data on what the enterprise zone, how the enterprise zone has been used in census tract 441 and 445, which is really the South Norwalk neighborhood. So since 2009, South Norwalk has seen 10 major developments, and we're all familiar with them: the Ironworks, the Pearl, 19 Day Street, Soundview Landing, Sono Collection, the Residence Inn. They include apartments, they include mixed use, residential, a hotel, and they represent more than $100 million in appraised value, more than 2.7 million square feet in development, and more than 330 residential units. I think the main takeaway here is that the program's added $6.9 million since 2009 to tax revenue to the grant list, and the abatement total has been around 1.3 million in total. So we're seeing a healthy ratio, I would say, of new incremental tax to the grant list versus what the tax abatement total has been. But the interesting thing is that of the 10 projects that have happened, 3 have been awarded the enterprise zone program: the Ely Ave project, which is an apartment building project, the Ironworks, and the Sono Residence Inn. So it is important to note that 2 projects are going through the process for the enterprise zone. They have not yet been awarded because they don't have final COs. So one of those is one of them is the Sono Collection Mall, and the second is 19 Day. So of the total of the 10 projects that we've seen since 2009, 5 of those projects are anticipated to use the enterprise zone program, 3 of which are currently using that program now. But if we look a little bit deeper into each of the projects that are using the enterprise zone, what we see is the Ely Ave units. They began receiving enterprise zones in 2010. And previous to that, the parcel was vacant. And so the land generated around $2,500 annually in taxes. And over the course of the 7-year period, which is the enterprise zone period, the value of abatements was around $50,000. But I think what's even more interesting is that now the units bring in more than $2,500 in annual taxes. And so if we were to look at the tax difference between 2010 and 2018, we see that it represents a 1,000% increase in the taxes. So when we look at the Ironworks, we see a similar, if not greater, impact. North Water Street began receiving enterprise zones in 2016, the Ironworks. So at one time, the property was assessed at $3 million, and now it has an assessment of nearly $30 million. So if we were to look at the taxes between 2007 and 2012, the property generated about $50,000 a year in property tax. Or if we were to look at it over the 6-year period, it'd be $300,000. But in the first year, the highest abatement year, the property paid about $50,000 in taxes. So even with the enterprise zone, it brought in the same amount of taxes as it did before it was ever developed. The difference is that in 2018, the property tax paid with the enterprise zone abatement was $374,000. And so if we were to look at the difference between the taxes between 2007 and the taxes between then in 2018, then we would end up seeing a 1,129% increase. So after 7 years, instead of $300,000 in taxes, the property will bring in about $4.9 million in taxes. So if we were to look here at the Residence Inn, again, very, very similar trend. The enterprise zone was awarded in 2018. The property was once assessed at less than $1 million. It now has an assessment of $15.6 million. From 2007 to 2013, the two parcels generally brought in $17,000 a year in property tax, or about $120,000 in total over that time. In the first year, which is the highest tax abatement year, the property owner paid about $48,000 in taxes. In 2007, the taxes for the property were approximately $13,000 parking lot. So it include this project is a 262% increase in taxes between 2007 and 2018. In 3 years, the property, well, 2019, I should say, in 3 years, the property taxes will have more than covered what was there previously. But this is a really interesting example and a little bit different than the other examples because this one's a hotel. So in non-COVID times, we're looking at the Residence Inn with around 80% occupancy, meaning that 400 people are visiting South Norwalk neighborhoods on a daily basis. But more than anything, I think what's interesting about the enterprise zone is that we have this snapshot of what it's doing to the actual property that's being redeveloped. But as Ely Ave was redeveloped and the Residence Inn was redeveloped and the Ironworks was developed, the direct impact that we saw from the city was the actual property that was being developed. We saw it go from, we saw it go from 13,000 to 50,000. We saw the rise in Ironworks of over 1,000%. But what this doesn't capture is the property value increase and the value that comes with the properties that are right next to these developments, or the properties that are down the road from these developments, or really the vitality and the population that these projects bring to neighborhoods that actually support the businesses and the retail in those neighborhoods itself. So I think that there's the interesting thing about the enterprise zone is that there's the qualitative piece, which is what we've just presented, or the quantitative piece, excuse me, that we just presented, but there's also a qualitative piece that's almost a non-tangible piece that we can't necessarily measure, but we see the rewards of it. We see that people are moving into our urban areas, people are moving into areas that we would like to see more density, and because those people are moving into those areas with higher density, they're supporting businesses that we want to be able to see on our main streets. So if we were to look at 441 and 445, Census Tracts 441 and 445, which is the existing enterprise zone, we could look at it from 2010 to 2018 and see the changes that have happened in the neighborhood over this time. So we've seen a 13% increase in population. We've seen a decrease in families in poverty by 17%. Unemployment rates decreased by 7%. Median household income has increased by 49%. And households that receive public assistance or SNAP have decreased by 9%. So again, please be aware, this is the American Community Survey 2010 versus 2018. So again, this is the snapshot in time that would be used to be able to determine the criteria, but also, so we wanted to be able to give you a little bit of a snapshot on how the neighborhood's changed over the time that the enterprise zone, that in the 10 years that we've measured the enterprise zone action in this particular area. So that was the existing enterprise zone. We're here to talk about that and give a snapshot in time of the 10-year period, but also talk about the proposed expansion. And this is something that we've been thinking about for a long time. It's the Wall Street West Ave area. It's been identified through the economic development tools like the POCD and also the redevelopment plan as an area to focus on, to be able to bring in more people, have more people live in the neighborhood. And as a result of more people living in the neighborhood, to be able to support more businesses and ground retail and really add that quality of life. And it has a great quality of life already, but to a certain extent, enhanced quality of life for residents and visitors to Norwalk. So we're here to propose expanding the current enterprise zone into 437, which is the Wall Street West Ave area. And if we were to look at the delineation of that census tract, again, slightly wonky, but it's contiguous with the existing enterprise zone, and that's an important piece. For any enterprise zone expansion that is proposed, it needs to be contiguous with the existing enterprise zone itself. So in this case, this proposed census tract shares the I-95 border with the other census tract, 441. So the south border of this census tract is I-95. The west is Route 7 up to close to Cross Street and North Ave, and then down through by the town green, hits East Ave, and then cuts through to the river. So this is the particular census tract in which we're speaking of. If we look at the criteria itself, it does not hit the percentage of individuals below poverty level, because that was 25% was the criteria there, and we're at 24.2. But it does hit in 2 of the other areas. So it hits the percentage of families who are receiving public assistance, and it also hits the employment rate. So employment rate for here is 8.6. The state average was around 3%, 3.6%, I believe it was on the other slide. But I think this is kind of the point that I was trying to make before, which is if this census tract does not hit on the 3rd criteria, which is the unemployment rate, it's very likely that the percentage of families who receive public assistance or welfare will also increase. So regardless of if we were to look at point in time for data, I believe that this census tract would still hit. But again, it's based on ACS data from 2018. So knowing that it hits based on these particular criteria, we don't anticipate that will change. So if we were to look at demographic information for the Wall Street West Ave census tract 437, we would see that we had an increase in population by 22%. But that, I put an asterisk beside that because the population numbers are the change in population between 2010 and 2018 shows a high percentage, but in reality, the numbers are a lot lower than the South Norwalk. The population numbers themselves are a lot lower than South Norwalk. So a change of this magnitude seems like a high number, but in reality, the number of people are not as many as what we saw in South Norwalk. For families in poverty, they actually increased by 1%. Unemployment decreased by 3%. Median household income increased by 45%, and households that receive public assistance or SNAP decreased by 3%. The interesting thing to note here, I think with Wall Street West Ave is that since 2019, we've only seen 2 projects, 2 major projects, I should say. One is Waypoint and the second is Head of the Harbor. So in comparison to a South Norwalk where we've seen 10 major projects, in that same time period, we've seen 2 here in Wall Street West Ave. And it makes us kind of think of, well, what is the potential growth and what's happening, and why aren't we seeing that same growth in Wall Street West Ave? And it's partly why we want to be able to use the enterprise zone as a catalyst, the program as a catalyst for growth, because we have seen that South Norwalk has had 10 developments and 5 of those have used the enterprise zone. So if we can use the enterprise zone as a catalyst for growth here in Wall Street West Ave, then we should consider doing that. And the potential growth sites are split into 3 buckets here: short-term, medium-term, and long-term. So for short-term, we'd be looking between 1 and 3 years. So we have the Lomans Plaza, the YMCA, Wall Street Place, High Point, and the Norwalk Public Library. Medium term is really like 3 to 5 years, I would say. 3 to 6 years, which is Yankee Doodle Block, the Pulse Point, the Riverview Plaza, head of the Harbor North, and Smith Street. And then long-term, we'd be looking out past 5 years. And so we have the library block, the Lily and August site, the auto zone, medical offices, and then some redevelopment infill opportunities like CVS and Dunkin' Donuts. So to come up with this list, we looked at potential growth sites that were identified as part of the redevelopment plan that was approved in May 2019. But we also met with planning and zoning, and we also met with building and code enforcement to ask where interest and action has been in the Wall Street West Ave area. I think the interesting thing that we've heard from the planning committee and from other folks that have seen this list is that this list looks very close, if not identical, to the list that was presented in 2016 when we were originally talking about the enterprise zone program being expanded. So it's clear that a catalyst is needed. And it's clear that it's not just the enterprise zone program, but some of the tools that we've been able to implement over the last 6 months or so as well. And I think using all those tools in a complementary way will help to get these sites up and running.
Hey, Jess, it's Tom again. Just to be clear, nobody's pulled a permit for any of these short-term or any of these developments, right? Sites?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
So there are a couple things for your consideration and for discussion based on what we just talked about as the existing enterprise zone and the proposal to expand the existing enterprise zone into Census Tract 437. One is that we would need to revise the language in the ordinance itself to include Census Tract 437. The second is that there are a few inconsistencies between our enterprise zone ordinance at the local level and the state statute, the state statute for the enterprise zone. But I think the third one is really probably where a big piece of conversation will come in, which is we know that tax abatement programs are not always the most popular type of program. And there's a lot of misinformation about programs such as the enterprise zone program and tax abatement program. One is that it takes all the taxes away from the grand list, which obviously we know it's not true considering $6.8 million is new incremental taxes and 1.3 was abated through the program. And there are different sort of pieces to the enterprise zone that people are comfortable with and not comfortable with. One of the things that we've discovered through this exercise is that the enterprise zone for South Norwalk is really was passed with a 10-year look back. So being able to look back 10 years and see what's been achieved and what hasn't been achieved. And I think that that acts somewhat like a sunset clause to a certain extent. But I think that the third bullet point here is really adding a sunset clause for the full enterprise zone program. So if you were to consider the proposal of expanding the enterprise zone, what is the city comfortable with? How long should a tax abatement program be in place? The enterprise zone is looked at as a catalyst program for development. We want to be able to pull in investment. We want to be able to have people live in the Wall Street West Ave area and really support the businesses and the retail that's there. So a big discussion is how long should a sunset clause be in place for, and how can we write that explicitly into the ordinance itself so that people have a comfort with that. So with those three considerations, and there could be other considerations, but in working with Brian and Sabrina, these are the three that we identified. So we have a couple of slides just to touch on each of these areas. So Brian, I don't know if you wanted to speak to these slides specifically, but I think you would probably be better suited to do that than I am.
Okay. So we're looking at, I guess we're on slide 19 now, geography. And if you can see in 36-1, which is the first section of chapter 36, our ordinance, The proposed change is in red line. And the change made is to make sure that our ordinance is in accordance with the provisions of 3271 as amended. And 3271 as amended is identified as fixing of assessments and enterprise zones. And that's effective July 9 of 2009. Excuse me. And the second part of this was how to identify the area, how to identify in the ordinance the areas that would be comprised and found within the enterprise zone. And so it could be, I guess, my thought was one of two ways. If the ordinance committee wants to proceed forward and expand this, we can do it in one of two ways. We can identify the specific census tracts, or we can say a map of the enterprise zone can be obtained. As I indicate, a map of the enterprise zone can be obtained from the Department of Economic and Community Development, or we can simply change the language to indicate that the following census tracts located within the city of Norwalk are included within the enterprise zone. It could be one of two ways. I did it one way as opposed to the other, but those are the two ways that I thought of that we could first amend 36.1 to make sure that it's in accordance with 3271 as amended, and then also to try and provide the public, anyone who's looking at this ordinance, a general idea of what census tracts are in it, or how can I get a copy of the map that would be applicable to this enterprise zone.
Brian, it's Tom. Are you looking for us to comment on the language now, or do you want to go through it? Because surprise, we'll have comments.
Maybe it's easier to go through all the slides, and then we can go back to any comments that people have. Okay. And so there was a discussion about updating to create our ordinance as being consistent with the state statute. So specifically, this slide number 20 is taking a look at 36.2 subsection C.
Brian, do you mind if I just offer a little bit of background on this?
Please go ahead. No, please go ahead.
So there are two different types of projects that could be offered tax abatement. One is more of a commercial project, which doesn't have this clause attached to it. But if it is a residential project, then it has this clause. And basically the clause says that a dwelling unit in such a property that's rented to any person, that anyone who is renting cannot have an income that exceeds 200% of the median income. So basically what happens on an administrative level is that for a commercial development, the tax assessor would apply the tax abatement each and every year for the 7-year period. For the residential property, it's slightly different. For the residential property, the property owner actually needs to submit all of the tax information for each of the tenants in the building itself. And the tax assessor confirms that the rent, that the income, the median income for the family or the person does not exceed the 200% criteria or rule here. So if they do exceed the 200% of the median income, then at the end of their lease, they're asked to leave. So this is an annual reporting that is required, and the annual reporting goes to the tax assessor's office. So that's what this particular clause refers to.
And so 36-2 subsection C, which is in front of you, is taken directly from the state statute, and the specific section of the state statute is 32-71 subsection B. So we changed some language. You'll see some crossouts, and that was to make it identical to the language in the state statute. Again, we can discuss any comments about language after we go through all the slides concerning the ordinance and the language. But I just wanted to let you know that this particular section that you're looking at on page 20 is identical to 3271 subsection B.
Sorry, Brian, just
Yes.
a question for Jessica, actually. Based on the ACS numbers that you're using right now, what is 200% median income right now?
So the 200% number is it's approximately I'm going to have to get you the specific number, David, and I should have had that number prepared, but I believe it's around 60 for a family of 4. And that is based on the HUD delineation of area median income, which is what is laid out in the state statute.
Thank you.
And I will look up that number and confirm with you before the end of the call.
Thanks.
And then on page 21 of what you're looking at right now is 36-2, and it's subsection A. And the changes are in red on the document that is on the website, but it's highlighted in yellow here. But those are all the changes. Again, in 36-2 subsection A, we wanted to indicate that the benefits that are being described below with the years 1 through 7 are in accordance with 32-71. And that language is identical. Those years and percentages are identical to 32-71 subsection A. You'll see that the enterprise zone shall have its real estate assessment fixed in accordance with 32-71 as amended, and such fixed assessment shall be for a period of 7 years. The shalls are also located in 32-71 subsection A. So again, that's taken directly from the state statute. The bottom paragraph is currently not in our ordinance. And again, it's taken directly from 32-71 subsection A, and it's found directly below the years and the percentage of increase deferred. And basically what this is saying is that if you have an assessment on an improvement that exceeds $80 million, the municipality may negotiate the fixing of assessments. Meaning, if you have some improvement that is in excess of $80 million, without this language, as I interpret it, without this language, the person who is seeking this enterprise zone abatement is going to turn around and say, well, I'm entitled to a 100% deferment for the first and second year, as opposed to the city having this language in, which is provided in the statute, which says that if it's in excess of this amount, the city can negotiate with that taxpayer to negotiate as to the fixing of the assessments, which means could be less than 100%, which would actually increase the amount of money being taken in.
Great. David, can we go back to your question on the previous slide? So the number that I gave you was the area median income. So for area median income for 2019, the income is 144,000. So for this in particular to this, which is 200% of the median income, that 200% number would be 288,000 for the household.
Great, thank you for that.
You're welcome. And lastly, the sunset clause, which we've just left for open discussion. Thank you, Brian, for explaining those previous changes.
Yeah, that was terrific, Brian. Thank you. And thank you,
No
Jessica.
problem.
That's a lot of work. And I know you've been so busy with so many other things for the city. So coming in to do this for us, we really appreciate your time and the late hour.
No, my pleasure.
Thank you. Does anybody have general questions first for either Brian or Jessica or Sabrina on this proposed?
I have a general question about the enterprise zone from a long-term standpoint and metrics. All of the improvement eventually ultimately raises property value, eventually ultimately raises an area. What then, are there studies done, and what has happened to areas? Do we see some of that, the lower income people leaving because they can't afford these areas over time, and what happens to that within our community?
Yeah, so it's definitely a fair question. I think that, your point speaks to gentrification really of a neighborhood, right? And gentrification, especially around transit-oriented development, and are we cognizant and are we aware of that? And And being in a HUD area that includes our neighboring communities, we see that that number is really high, obviously, right? So when we see 200% of AMI, and we're talking about, 280,000 or whatever it happens to be, that's a big number. So it's a good question. I think, when we did the zoning changes, we actually changed the requirement for the affordable housing. So originally we were saying that a development had to have over a certain number of units, and that they needed to have a certain number of those units be affordable. If it was over a certain number of units, then we had to have 10% that was affordable. What we did is we actually changed the zoning for South Norwalk, but we also changed it for Wall Street West Ave to say that any development that is 12 units or more requires at least 10% of the housing be offered at affordable. So we've tried to build it into the policies that are existing on the zoning side. And the enterprise zone is applicable to developments as of right. So if the development comes in and is offering those units as workforce housing units or affordable units, then they would meet the zoning code, which then means that in general, these apartments have that higher rental number just because we're bunched in with all these other communities. But in reality, they have to meet that 10% number. So we've been trying to, so that doesn't give a specific answer to your question, but what we try to do is build in those policies into other tools that we have, like zoning, to ensure that we hold a number of we hold a certain number of apartments, and we hold developers accountable for being able to offer affordable housing for residents.
Thanks, Jessica. You sort of went to what the second part of my question was going to be. And that's my point, is that we have things built in that keep affordable housing within an area like Census Tract 437, because I think that's an important piece of our community. And I don't want to see that lost as we progress forward.
I agree.
So I'm very sensitive to the very late hour and how long we've kept both Jessica and Brian. I'm wondering if we could talk about, in general terms, whether we're supportive of this concept, and if maybe we could go back and work a little bit with Brian on language for the statute in general. Is there a consensus from everybody about how they, in general, do we feel that we should go forward with this and work on the language?
Yeah,
Right, Mandy?
I mean, Manny Langella here. I mean, I think this is very well done. I mean, tying off your point, Dave, like studies on other studies from cities, and in order to support communities, you need a well-developed urban core, right? And I've been a South Norwalk resident for 8 years, so I've seen a lot of this development, what it's done down here, and even for my the local area, like the transient, the population that's moving around, what it looks like from then until now, it's transformative, right? So I think this is definitely something that helps mitigate people, quote unquote, leaving. And as long as we have the policies and plans in place to support holding developers accountable, I think this does nothing but improve. It moves us forward. I mean, no pun intended to our former motto as our town.
Great, thank you. Any
This
other
is Tom.
reactions?
Yeah, Tom,
Thanks,
let me say, I'm definitely in favor of moving it forward. I recognize that it is late and my comments can get tedious. So I'd be willing to work with anybody, Lisa, you, anybody else, Brian and Jessica, to some of these comments. I just want to ask a couple very quick ones, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Jess, and maybe Brian, on 36.2b, it says the Common Councils have the power by resolution to grant additional deferments of up to 100%. What are we referring to there? I mean, is this on top of the deferment in A? I just want to make sure we all understand what we're talking about.
You're referring to this, right?
That's A, right? And then B, which you don't have in front of you, says the Common Council shall have this is the current ordinance, shall have the power by resolution to grant additional deferments of up to 100% of the assessment attributable to such improvements for a period of up to 7 years from the date of the improvement referred to in subsection A. Does that mean we can go on 14 years?
The way Yeah,
sorry, go ahead, Brian.
I mean, the way I'm reading that language that you're reading right there, it sounds like that it can go up to 14 years, but I don't know if Jessica thinks something different.
I can speak to that a little bit. This is Sabrina here. So that's actually saying that we can defer more than the amount that is suggested in the state statute.
So we could do 50% for all 7 years. We could do 100% for all 7 years, right, Sabrina?
Yeah, so that clause in there is really there so that we can enter agreements for projects that may be larger, that we feel are necessary, so that we can change up the numbering so that we can get the projects done. So it gives the council a little bit of discretion if they wanted to give a more flexible deferment plan than what's outlined.
Okay, and I take it that's in the state statute.
That is in the state statute. Yep, that's a copy. This is a copy, and that what you see on the screen now and what you're talking about is a direct copy from
Right.
the statute.
And I'm sorry, just one other question, and Jessica, this is for you. You know, the Department of Economic and Community Development is going to keep the map as drafted, but the redevelopment agency is in here as sort of the reviewer. Do we want to keep it that, or do we want to switch to Economic and Community Development?
So we discussed that a lot actually behind the scenes, and I think that the areas where we want to use tools like this are where redevelopment agency plans are in place, and speak to the overarching goals and objectives of the neighborhood. I think that with programs such as this, redevelopment agency is well suited to be able to accept the applications and work, but that doesn't mean that they're able to bring the application through to fruition. They need to work directly with our department and with our office to be able to do that. And the tax assessment needs to the tax abatement actually needs to be applied by the tax assessor's office. So we did talk about bringing it into city. We can do that. Our office can totally do that. We're well equipped to be able to do that. But I believe it's always been this process, which isn't particularly the best answer, but it has been this way. Experience in being able to look at the enterprise zone as well as Tammy Strauss. We did contemplate changing it over, but it's worked in the past in this way, and it's worked in the past for using this process. So we didn't feel as though it needed a change.
So
What's your best recommendation? Because that was a question I had too. So your best recommendation is to leave it where it is.
I want to speak to that just a little bit, because currently the process, so if the project is just applying for the normal as of right breakdown via the statute. So if they're applying for the regular deferment, all that we're doing, and I'm doing this internally, is verifying that they're in the enterprise zone. So I'm currently doing that now. And then that letter that they get from me that says that they're in the zone gets forwarded to the tax assessor to them when they apply the deferment. So that's the as of right piece. But the second piece is if we wanted to change that up to have some specificity, or for a longer period of deferment, or for different increments of deferment, that would then go to the redevelopment agency, to where they would analyze if the longer term or the differing deferment actually makes sense for the project and do that internal analysis.
So they would do the financial analysis do the financial analysis and the return on investment analysis, which is the deferment versus the incremental tax.
Okay.
Quick question then on the heels of that, does that mean, do we need to change the language within this to really show that that's how this hierarchy works?
Brian, I'm not sure. How do you think, what's your recommendation on that?
Let me take a look real quick.
While Brian's looking at that, are there other comments that we ought to take from the group so that we can, when we go into the drafting part of this process before next meeting?
I would just, Lisa, this is David again, just simply say, yeah, I'm in support of moving forward and drafting and finding a way to add 437 to the ordinance for the enterprise zone.
Great, thank you.
Hi,
Dominique and
Lisa.
Tom, yeah.
Yeah,
Hi,
it's
Tom.
Tom Keegan. How are you?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that, and Jess and I have spoken about this, that we have a discussion about the sunset clause on this. That's going to be something that I'm going to be very interested and very vocal on.
Good. That's good to know. I think that a lot of us have that sense. One of the things that Tom Livingston and I were looking at this a little bit with Brian. Right now we've had this look back, how well did this work? And we had a report. I think that having some kind of accountability about the success of the program is an important thing to build into that sunset clause. Does that appeal to you?
Yeah, and just stay, listen, we're going to offer this program, and you only have a certain amount of time that this program is going to be on the table, and it's not going to be I hope I could say this word in perpetuity. I did say it. Because I don't think that's fair to the taxpayers. That's
gotcha. And
so,
Dominique, do you have a point of view? Dominique, you're, I think, the one person I haven't heard from yet. On
Yes,
this.
thank you. I hear Brian wanted to chime in, but if
No,
I
go
could-
ahead, Dominique.
Oh, thank you, Brian. I want to thank David for his comments about gentrification. That was a question I had. So thank you, Jessica, for the median income data. Tom, I agree with your point about the sunset clause, and I'd like to add to that, if it's possible to get community input, especially from, as Manny described, seeing what this process was like in Sono, if we can particularly hear from community members as we draft the sunset clause, might be a consideration I'd like to put forward, or at least to have some real guidance on that from stakeholders.
Yeah,
Great.
certainly. I think we get that from
Brian, you wanted to comment on the redevelopment?
Yeah, two things. First thing is I had a chance to take a look at the first sentence again in 36.2 subsection B, and I misread it. It basically means that the Common Council shall have the power to grant additional deferments on the assessments that are listed above up to 7 years from the date of improvement. And that's the important thing. So it's not an additional 7, it's the original 7. They can manipulate it if they so choose. I think that since we're talking about process underneath that with what the redevelopment agency is doing or will do, if the Department of Economic and Community Development is going to have a part of this as well, then it should probably be listed in here. That would be my thought on that, so that everyone who looks to this will know exactly what the process will look like, where to go, who to discuss it with, things of that nature.
Brian, if I could add to that, I would suggest adding that piece above subsection B, just because subsection B is when you're getting into the council suggesting different deferment. So we don't get to be usually at all. If it's by right, they just go through the process of coming to me, and then that's kind of it. And then it's dealt with the tax assessor's office. So
That's fine, as long as the people looking at this, the public or whoever it might be, has an idea from this ordinance. Since we're describing what the process is underneath it, perhaps what a generalized description of the process and who they should go to first, and things of that nature, that might be helpful.
I think that'd be great. So what I'd like to propose to everybody, if this suits everybody, this late hour, is that Brian and I and a couple of others work on the language and propose that for our next meeting. And we'll review that language at that time. Hopefully we'll come to some consensus, and then we'll send it to public hearing more like July, if that sounds good to everybody.
I think
Okay.
that sounds great. This is David.
Great,
Sounds
thanks
good.
everybody. And then I'm just gonna,
Sounds
one
great.
last thing, I wanted to give Brian a little bit of a heads up, or like a thank you, because he's working in the gender neutral language. Do you want to say something just for the notes for our record so that we can?
Sure. So there was a request made right at the beginning of the when the city went on lockdown with the coronavirus. There was a request that I became aware of about gender neutral language in the charter and the ordinances. So I've been going through the chapters of the ordinances to start with. Some of them are shorter than others. So basically right now, I've gone through 56 chapters of the ordinance. We still have many more to go, plus the charter, but I'm going to deal with the ordinances first. going through and making sure that gender neutral language is inserted in there. It was a request that was made and forwarded on by the Common Council to do. So that's part of one of the things that I've been doing in addition to all these other ordinance provisions. And at the next meeting, I'll let you know how much further I've gotten at that point.
Great, thank you. I know that's a thankless job and it takes much more time than one would ever want. So do I hear a motion to adjourn? Does everyone have their hands up?
Everybody.
All right, everybody. Thank you for hanging in so late and so long, but we got through it. It's done. And we'll be getting together sometime in June to talk about this enterprise.